Welcome to the meeting. Today is April 4th, 2018, and we'll continue with our budget review.
If I could just introduce.
And Mr. Bill Webster will introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So last week, the management team met, which is made up of most of the people in the audience. So these are the educational leaders from the various departments and buildings, and came up with a recommendation to make some adjustments to the budget and to balance the budget, particularly in the light of two bits of favorable news. One, our health insurance premium came in at 4.5% rather than 6%. So that was about a $157,000 benefit. And then as we reviewed our reserves further, we realized that we had over-reserved for certain elements, and that was a benefit of $160,000. And so you can see at the top of the schedule a little over $300,000 in additional revenue. And then you can see the management team recommendations in the next section, also totaling the same amount of money in essence. Now, we've since had another change in the budget, which is not reflected in this recommendation. And that, as well as a couple of other things, have been added to the discussion items below. And what my suggestion would be is there's someone in the audience here to talk about all the management team recommendations, so the board will at least have the benefit of hearing why they felt that that was important to reinstate. And there's some in the audience prepared to talk about some of the board items in addition that were listed below at the bottom. And the intent is that at the end of the night, we're going to get through every one of these items. If the board is able to make a determination tonight, great. What is equally likely is the board may conclude that certain items ought to be included in the budget and that certain cuts need to be identified and charge me as superintendent, and I basically would work with the educational leaders in the audience in a special meeting that we would have to come back to the board on Monday with a list of recommendations as how we would balance that shortfall. Now, I want to make sure you're looking at the right list, so that the list that was originally included in the memo has been updated. And the update includes some new information, including some suggestions from board members, and that is labeled Summary Document to Board 4418. And Bobby is, you all have a hard copy of that updated. The audience has a hard copy, and Bobby can put this up on the screen too as well, so people viewing, I hope, could look at it as well. So the chair willing, my suggestion would be we just start at the top, and we hear, these are not lengthy presentations, but hear what the educational leaders have to say to each of these things, and then continue on down the list and see where we end up.
So just to clarify for the board, this comes from the list that we had kind of given Bobby, and the administration and directors listened to that list and went back and kind of reviewed and made adjustments?
That is correct. There also are things that may not have been on the board's list, that there are principals that would like to bring some things to your attention that you may not have been aware of. And there are also things that continue down below that were not part of the management team's recommendation. Again, the management team's recommendation overall is outdated just because of the additional cuts we're going to have to do. But I think it would be helpful to the board to hear the various presentations And then as we discuss other things, obviously it's going to be weighing what's most important. And so I think we should have a good short presentations on each of these items and a good conversation to follow. So if you're okay, that we would start with Bobby, who would talk about.
Right, but I wanted to say thanks to the directors and the administration for being proactive and getting to this very timely. So we appreciate that. That's a good time savings and good organization on your behalf. And you said health insurance. You would like to start with that? Is that I saw a hand over here from Miss Ray,
Bobby start.
but Miss Ray had a question first, I believe.
I just was curious if, so under the team recommendation, management team recommendations, adult ed recommendations, there we go. If those were in order of priority or just article.
Go ahead.
Are there any questions from the board before we start? Okay, seeing none. Bobby, if you don't mind, are you more comfortable there, or would you like to go to the podium? If you don't mind, I would prefer the podium if you don't mind. Thank you. Don't forget to hit the button there.
So the only thing with that is that my computer's over there. I haven't figured out how to be here and to work the computer at the same time. So we're probably not going to use this while I mean, you can see some of the items. For these three, I think it's okay. Okay. So as far as the first item, this is health insurance. And as we know, we put into the budget 6%. And our rates actually came back at 4.5% of an increase. So that's realizing roughly $158,000 of savings to the budget, which is really great. The next item is the reserve adjustments, and we had talked about that, I think, at the very first budget workshop. And this $160,000 is actually accounting for all of the teachers that we know that are going to be retiring. And what we did was it's essentially it's kind of double counting on the retirement allocation, because when we hire when an outgoing teacher, a retiring teacher, let's say they're making $68,000 and we hire a new teacher. No, it's okay. Welcome. And we hire a replacement teacher, and let's say that teacher is being hired at $40,000. As you can see, there's a $28,000 savings to the budget. And so that essentially makes up for the retirement payout that we give to that retiring teacher. So we were able to reduce that reserve number by $160,000. And then we had a coding error as it relates to the middle school transportation for extracurricular activities. And so that was to the tune of $14,000. So this is a good time to fix that. So we put that back into the budget for a net overall budget reduction as of right now of just under $304,000. Any questions on those three items?
Go ahead. So, taking that 303,000, the management team, we discussed certain things that we as a management team, building principals and directors, and also school board members, school committee members, thought were important. And the first three, as you can see, line 4, 5, and 6, are returning 80% of the cuts to K through 12 instructional supplies, books and periodicals, and instructional equipment. And when I looked at the numbers of what we have spent over the past couple of years, we have traditionally flatlined those, and 80% would bring us roughly to where we could sustain what we do in the classrooms. We'd have to make some adjustments, but that would be pretty much the bare minimum of what we've been doing over the past few years, looking back at previous budgets. Some lines were spent more than others in certain buildings, but in overall, if we're able to return 80% of those cuts, and you can see the dollar figures next to it, we would be able to sustain programming at the current levels that we have traditionally done at Lewiston Public Schools for those three articles. I think it was Ms. Hutchinson brought that she would like to see some of those things back in the budget. And so using that request, we went through the budget, looked at all the building lines, and those numbers would bring us up to where we think we need to be for the next fiscal or school year. And so, again, that is elementary, middle school, high school, and all of our cost centers. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions about those three areas.
Thanks, Sean. I'm curious if you also have the number for returning 100% of those cuts, or where we could find that easily aggregated.
I could do that and get back to you.
That'd be
In
great.
the next few minutes.
I feel like that'd be interesting to see how much of a difference that is.
Yeah, we could do those numbers pretty quick. It would just be
Plus 20%.
exactly of that.
I don't have my calculator.
But I could do that in the back and then work it out for you. About 54,720, Jake said. Approximately 54,720. Good job. Thank you, Jake. Does that make sense? Again, that would bring us to where we have traditionally been spending in the past few years, because every line doesn't get spent down to zero every year, and needs change throughout the course of the year. So that's why we felt like if we could return it back to the 80% of the original request, we could maintain where we need to be.
And we'll move forward with ELL and contracted services.
So our contracted services line for ELL covers our interpreter and translation fees for the district. And that contracted services is actually broken up across all different cost centers, so all the different elementary schools, the middle school, and the high school. It is a small amount, roughly $2,500, but in being fiscally responsible, we are legally required to provide interpreter and translation services to parents. And so that $2,500 is something we would most likely be spending no matter what, because it's our legal responsibility. So it's important to have it in the budget, because that's an accurate picture of what we're projected to spend across the different cost centers.
Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
And yes, she's here. So return cuts to Lewiston Middle School extracurricular.
Hi. Yeah, those were originally cut only because we had to make some reductions from the budget, and rather taking them from regular instructional, we decided to take them from some of the extracurricular funds. But if there's money available to allow them to put back in, we do have a lot of students that participate in the extracurricular activities after school, especially for enrichment purposes.
Am I correct that some of that monies was for middle school cross-country?
Yes.
And the only reason I say that is that that typically is one of the most popular programs where it's offered. Thank you.
Is it being offered this year? It is. I heard.
So yes, cross country is still on there. I thought that a majority of the co-curricular were not the sports, but I could, that one was? Okay. The ones that I had some intentionality over cutting were a variety of like robotics, for example, keeping it one trimester instead of all 3 trimesters, things like that. Things that we could potentially.
I saw a hand over here.
So were there things, I guess, could you be more specific about the things that were going to be cut, or is it just, were
Yeah, I
you going
don't-
to,
Yeah.
were you going to see,
I had originally laid them out, and I apologize. I just came over from the parent-teacher conferences, so I don't have the specific. Can I circle back around and come back up? I had listed them out on the original.
it was on our sheet that the night you presented, was it on that sheet?
on the night I went, yeah, I
Okay.
put the things that I would like
I
to
can
put
refer
back
back.
on.
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Any further questioning from the board? Seeing none, we'll move over to Jake Langlis with return 50% of cuts to Lewiston High School co-curricular.
These initial cuts, part of our proposed budget, are in the memo that was provided, but I have some details with me. We had some things that we cut that were connected to student leadership opportunities, dues and fees connected to sending students to numerous things, which student rep Matt Hurd was a big advocate for, made a difference in his education, and wanted to see that opportunity expanded for other students. Also, we had additional stipends connected to that. We have an anime club that has over 40 students that attend weekly or bi-weekly when they meet, and that advisor is a volunteer currently, so we'd like to compensate him. We're also looking for an additional Pride Committee advisor, which is connected to our school, various levels of Pride. One of the things that we've been trying to grow, that has been trying to grow for years, is that component of Pride in Lewiston High School and how we grow that. And we wanted to compensate some people to do some of that work. There's also some co-curricular equipment needs that are not sports specific that we had added, specifically about $12,000, and again, that's more equipment, supplies, things that they would need to run the clubs, everything from a piece of paper to a piece of equipment they might need for certain things. Those were the vast majority of our co-curricular cuts. So it's really about student opportunity, advisors, and the materials they would need to run those clubs and organizations for our school.
Questions from the board? Seeing none, we'll move ahead. Thank you. Amber Eliason's next with McMahon 6th grade Chromebooks.
Hi. So sixth graders across Lewiston Public Schools got Chromebooks 2 years ago, and so not last year, but the year before, when we were deploying those, which are awesome. Like, I was at Montella when they had the Chromebooks there. They're really effective because they run all the web-based programs, and we have students with access to all the Google apps. So there's a lot that you can do, and they're pretty durable, and they don't cost a whole lot of money compared to other computers. But then the money ran out to get McMahon what they needed, so we have iPads. I think they were a little bit cheaper so they could afford that. And then last year we were supposed to get them, but we had the need for the teacher laptops, and that took all of that money, so then that got cut. And then this year was our year, and then Dave got told to cut some more, and I'm like, I need my Chromebooks. So I'd like to see the students, have that equity across the district, and I'm very, hesitant to push it back any further. And I don't want us to run into a problem with technology, and that's really what happened with elementary teacher computers. We went too long, and then we were really, having to pull all of the money to get the teacher laptops up to speed. So we have some really awesome sixth grade teachers that are going to use them in a really intentional way for leveraging learning and bringing students up with their learning. So I'd really like to see my students benefit from those. The iPads are very near their end of life too. We might get a year or two out of them in a lower grade or something, but they're not going to last much longer. Thanks. Oh, questions?
Questions from the board? One for myself. All right.
Yeah.
Do. How many Chromebooks?
So we have anywhere between 90 and 100, looking at 90 to 100. Okay. Yeah, my student enrollment is 90 to 100, so I would do the 100, and that way you have one for a new kid that moves in if that balloons. And we do have, because we have all our own sixth graders, and then we have all of the, we have the day treatment program there too. So we have a class of 10 sixth graders as well, and I want those students to receive the same opportunities and resources as everyone else. Any other questions?
Seeing none, thank you very much. Mr. Spott will present the reallocation of $40,000 of Empower costs to staff development.
Yes, I'd like just to speak to that briefly. With the decision that that Mr. Webster talked to the school committee about a couple weeks ago, I'm not having Empower. That was allocated in each building's technology account, and that was $5,100 per cost center. 6 elementary schools, the high school, which also included LRTC, and the middle school, and 8 times 51 comes out to about 40,800. And we'd like to maintain that money, but reallocate that money for professional development. Specifically around, we're going to need to be able to train our teachers in using the new Power School module for standards-based learning. And we haven't talked as a management team or PBL implementation committee as yet, because we need to know how much money is going to be in the budget for PD, but our staff is going to need some additional training in order to support that new module. We don't see it happening every year, but certainly we need to provide them the training and how to use that new interface, and we would use that to help train our teachers in that. So keeping that, pulling it out of spending it for Empower, but pushing it into PD for a one-time cost to train our teachers before the start of the new school year.
Ms. Hutchinson?
In the budget already, wasn't there already money for professional development around Empower?
There is some, and Sean may be able to speak to it better than I. This 40,000, as I understand it, would allow every K-12 teacher for 1 day of professional development in the summer. We had only budgeted for a portion of that.
That's correct. And we do have PD money in there to do different things, but now we weren't planning, obviously, of transitioning to a totally different platform. So we need to understand the new platform. We started those conversations last week, and we had another meeting about it today. And so we need to prepare to support our teachers, our administrators in using that platform, so then we can teach our students and our parents on how to access it, both from the student and the parent portal as well. So we need that training in order to do that and do it well.
So I guess my question is, how much is already allocated in the budget for professional development on top of what you're asking to restore here with the 40,000? And is that enough to provide the proper training in the most timeliest manner for our staff to be able to be ready to go come fall?
That's a good question, and I honestly don't have the answer for that, because we don't have all the answers as of today. That decision was made, if you remember, 2 weeks ago to transition. We have just started inquiring into Power School. We know it's capable of doing it. We did the groundwork with that. We have feelers out to Power School itself. There's professional development called Power School University. We're looking into potentially bringing in one of those folks here to start that training. So we have calls out and emails to them on a menu of asking them to present us a menu of different options on what's best for the district our size, with 6 elementary schools, a middle school, the high school, and the technical center, about what would be best in their opinion, because they've worked with many schools throughout the country, on having a PD plan and getting their input, since they've done it with the multiple districts around. So I don't have that answer. I expect by the end of April we'll have a better idea what the PD plan will look like. So this is we have multiple things happening all at the same time. So it doesn't give us a lot of time to come up with a concrete plan at this point, on what that plan will look like, thus how many dollars we'll need to do that. I feel comfortable enough that if we were able to reallocate this money, that we'll be able to provide PD. But to answer your question honestly and openly, I don't know if it's enough or if it's too much at this time.
So we don't have the modular yet, right?
We do.
Or
It's
we
part.
do?
It's part. We're not asking to have an upgrade, or this is not about upgrading to that Power School Pro. It's part of our cost that we pay Power School. It's simply around bringing in teachers to train them.
Any other discussion?
If I could just answer the question in part, if looking at Article 5 on page 6 of the detail, there's staff PD district-wide, and the original recommendation was that was in the initial draft before it got to the board was 348,000. That was cut to 294,000 in order to balance it, and that's what's reflected in the initial package that went to the board. So that 40,000 would roughly return it to what we had originally asked, and I know that included a full day of PD for all teachers. It's on page 6 of Article 5, the detail.
And while you're looking at that, that is not only just proficiency-based learning, professional development. That's restorative practices. That's summer school PD. All the PD that we do in the district around multiple different initiatives and importance throughout the district. So that's not one specific thing. That's PD for the district for everything that we do.
Would the board like to continue or have any questions while you look at the information, or just pause for a moment? Seeing no recognition, we'll move ahead. Thank you. Next, we'll move to LHS replacement van or vans of 40,000.
So the next item on the list is $40,000 for 2 van replacements. My understanding is that back in the day, maybe a few years ago, how many? 4?
1 year ago, there was a van that went to maintenance.
Oh, okay. I don't know that story then. I'll let you tell it.
So
This is a different story.
a couple different pieces of information. Years back, there were multiple vans that were accessible by our both high school technical centers, and other schools often borrowed them, middle school, etc., to do everything from field trips, experiential-based learning, taking our AVET kids, get them talented to Bates and things like that for field trips, extra learning opportunities. I was talking to Rob recently, and to date, we've had over 400 requests for vehicle use through Rob's office, who helps coordinate where those vans go. Right now, we're down to more or less 1 van that I would say by the end of the year may not be roadworthy, and that's for everyone. And so we made a pitch for initially some funds to get either a new van or a couple of used vans. Probably used would be more efficient financially. And Rob can attest that these vehicles are used morning, afternoon, and night. And so that was where I was leaning towards new, just because I knew we're going to put the miles on. So over the history of time between maintenance needs, wear and tear, and some moving of resources within the district, our campus currently is down to 1 vehicle. That is how many passenger? 7? Of the small bus. So, just between different things, things deemed not safe. We don't have the opportunity to travel. Um, this compounds in its effect for our sports and athletics. Can talk to it from the arts perspective. They use them nonstop, and really just very concerned that we don't have the ability to transport a group of students for anything. The one bus is essentially too small to do what we need it to do. So we look for other ways to do this. And with the shortage of drivers through Hudson, we're actually finding things that are popping up now that we can't even secure a bus for a sports team to travel to a local competition. We've had arts folks have to look for alternate funds and other pathways to get students to and from other events that had been booked prior, but then we got a call saying there was no transportation available. So I just think a high school campus of our size, and I would say the LRTC has been very good at sharing. Special ed's been very good at sharing. The vans, when we had them, we were good at sharing. Middle school utilized them. It's tough for me to think that we don't have transportation tied to our school in that sense. Hope that goes.
I don't even know what I could add to that. That's really good. This $40,000 actually is, we'll get a big bang for our buck if we do decide to put these into the budget. As Jake said, if we hire Hudson or some transportation vendor service, it's going to be very costly to do that. In my short time of being here, I've had to take a few of those transportation calls. Like, what are we going to do? Because we don't have transportation. So it would be too bad. Whoops. I need stretchy arms. So it would be too bad to not be able to transport kids to where they need to go. Good. Any questions?
Discussion from the board? Ms. Estabrook.
How many vans do we think 40,000 could purchase? One?
We're hoping for two used ones.
To inquire, to add to that, how many do we currently have and how many do we currently use?
Right now we have one minibus on the road, and Rob can't keep up with the requests. They're used it's used nonstop. Yeah.
Okay, that's why I was wondering, because
Yep.
I only hear one, but we've had three?
Yeah, we had
As many as four at one point. When they're out of service, do they go to the junkyard? What happens to them? Sure. Maybe we should discuss it more when come up. But what are the passenger sizes on these?
So the two that we'd request would be the 7-passenger vans for lots of logistical reasons. If we had two, we could bring, again, we could fill those and bring a team and things like that to places in most cases. The reason
Just regular maintenance. So basically, you're saying there's 7 passenger vans, like a caravan, or these are not the mini buses that we're thinking of. These are just regular like vehicles that anybody. So that helps out with the concern that we've had recently with the discussion of missing bus drivers and special licenses and so forth. So that makes more sense. So thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, 6 sounds good because, I mean, there must be a huge cost savings to our district just by having just a few of those. And
I have another question. So I want to circle back around from the last conversation we had about the other vehicles that we had purchased but are just sitting there not being used. And I had a question of, I know this wasn't a popular statement by me, but selling those so that we could use those funds somewhere else. Is that something that anybody wants to consider at this point?
I would assume if they can't be purposed for our students, or maybe Rob's programs for diesel mechanics or live work opportunities, that we as a district should absolutely consider moving them along. I don't know what the level of interest is. And Rob could also speak to some of those buses are in better shape than others from when we got them, knowing that, what it's worth.
And to that, the dollars received on those is marginal. It's small, but it's something. We would get something, even if it's for metal, scrap metal.
All right, so possibly with $40,000, it could be more than 2 vans. Could be. I'm just saying, if we're getting them used. So that's good to know. But any other discussion from the board? Mr. Kerr?
So are you saying that a full-size van would require a different license?
No, by rule, any, for example, like a 15-passenger van that we could rent, by law, we're actually not supposed to fill that with kids and drive it without having a commercial driver's license.
And do you know what level that changes? 10 passenger or 12?
It's over 8. Because you're 8 in the driver, right? Is it the rule? There's rules around the size of the student and things of that nature too. What's considered an adult, what's not. It's
All right, thank you.
And it's been a while since I've looked at this, but my understanding is that we have to go by the manufacturer's rating of the vehicle. And if they say that it is for 20 students, even though we feel it could only fit 14, or even though we might take a seat or two out, we still have to have that commercial driver's license.
Any further discussion from the board? Thank you. We'll move ahead to Montello painting and door replacement.
Thanks. I can't remember how this quite shaped up, and I think it speaks to a broader issue, which I kind of like to talk about a little bit. But just to remind you, the last time I presented, I talked to you a little bit about the condition of Montello School. So the physical plant has a lot of years ahead of it. I don't know how many of those are. I'm not an engineer or an architect, but we've put a lot of, had a number of projects over, at least during my time at Montello, to keep the building safe and productive. And so just a quick review, we converted from oil burning service to natural gas a few years ago, updated all the heating system in the building. We have updated all the air exchange in the building, updated lockers and cubbies in the building for storage for students. And actually that was a safety concern as well. With old lockers, they had lots of pointy edges that people could run into. So that was actually a safety upgrade as well. So there's been a number of things that have been done to the building, but there are some things that haven't been done to the Montello building. And this painting and doorway represent a small piece of that I'd like you to be aware of. And then I'd like to just give you sort of a preview of what I hope you will continue to think about when we think about student experiences in Lewiston. The other big project we had just a few years ago was redoing our front entranceway, and that served two purposes. One was being a more welcoming place for our community, both our students, but our broader community, and also improving the safety of the building. It allowed for more visibility and a system for people to come in and check in and for us to know exactly who is in the building. So it might be perplex some people that we would be looking to upgrade the front doors when they were just upgraded a few years ago. What I want you to know is when that project was done, it was done on a budget, and it was done at the same time that the Lewiston Middle School was having their renovation. And so we used a number of recycled materials from the middle school to finish the project at Montello. And I wish Lou was here to speak to the specifics of the entrance system, but it is problematic from a locking standpoint and a security standpoint. And also, I believe in the right design, it will also have one more center door, which in effect creates an air block so that our receptionist, every time the door opens, isn't being overcome by cold air and papers flying everywhere. But the real issue is a safety concern, and that doorway cannot be locked out or entered through similar to other doors, and so it requires a manual. I actually have to have a custodian unlock it in the morning, lock it in the evening to make the mechanism work. So there's two parts, and it's so it just needs to be upgraded, and Louis could, I'm sure, talk to you a little bit more about that. In terms of the paint, with all the terrific upgrades I've talked to you about, our classrooms and our hallways have been sorely neglected, and you know, I certainly can take some responsibility for not being loud about that. Oh, and by the way, we've had some roofing done in the last year too, so like big parts have been done. But our hallways, and for those of you, I got a chance to have Tanya and Mark over a couple weeks ago, and we had a lot of good discussion around things around PBL and things they wanted to talk about, and I tried to slip in some things that I wanted to talk about as well, and I think they got a chance to see some of what I was talking about. So I'm going to get a chance with Alicia right after the break, and I hope the rest of you will come along to see the rest. But our hallways and our classrooms haven't been painted, and they haven't been updated, and they do not have a clean appearance. They do not have a warm and inviting appearance. And I think when we think about the environment we want for our students and the environment we want for our employees, they don't make the grade. And I think I'm louder about this now than I have been in the past because I'm keenly aware that in another year, Lewiston will open the Connors School. And at that point, my concern is that we will have an inequity for one group of students in Lewiston in that their classroom environment and our workers' environments will not be equitable. And so the money represented here is, Louis and I have talked about and met with a painting contractor, and this only represents getting our hallways started, exterior fascia boards, things like that, which again, if not upkept, are just going to deteriorate further. And this does not represent any of our classrooms. So at some point that piece needs to be addressed. And I think the way to address it is to have a plan in place that is consecutive years and that we do not cut or defer. When I hear defer, I usually think about cut because it doesn't always show up the next year. So that concerns me. So this is just putting back in the paint to the hallways, addressing the front door issue, and I want you to know that that is a small piece. The other piece I want you to be aware of that is not on here, but it speaks to the same thing, and it's kind of related to what Amber was talking about with Chromebooks for students. And I think it's been my staff makes me aware of it every time we do professional development in another building, because we typically do professional development at either the Geiger School or the Farwell School, or recently we did one at McMahon School. And what our teachers notice when they go in classrooms is that all those classrooms have instructional technology that is up to date, that is interactive. In many of the classrooms, particularly the new buildings, and I suspect in the new Connors, in their design, probably has a sound system in the room that might allow a teacher to be anywhere in the room, talk with this voice, and and no matter where a student is in the room, they can hear that. So this has been a piece that I've gone over with, that Dave and I have talked about, and needing a plan to upgrade those classrooms, to bring them up to a level that other students would experience and other teachers would experience in other schools in the coming years. And I just want to reiterate that without a plan in place to do that, it just doesn't happen. We have been working at least my 5 years as principal to make sure every classroom is outfitted with an LCD projector. To date, they're not all mounted. So that means I've got them on carts or on desks. that creates other hazards. So those are the kinds of things that need a real plan and need support to make sure those plans come to fruition. So you'll probably hear from me again about some of those things. But the painting would go a long ways to creating at least a warmer and more inviting environment for our students and for our employees who are deserving.
Discussion from the board, Mr. Kerr? I see you reaching for the button there.
So if I remember correctly, your lobby area, the front side of it at least, is all glass. Is that
Correct.
all right?
Yes.
And this replacement of doors doesn't address any of the glass issues, like getting rid of it and making it solid wall. And so, and I'll continue on before you answer if you don't mind. But we hopefully are going to have an agreement in the budget for the assessment, the security assessment. I'm guessing if they saw that, that would probably be a high priority to.
In talking to Louis, I suspect it would be. I mean, again, that's not a area that I know a lot about, other than I can tell you from my standpoint of entering and exiting the building and worrying about whether or not my building is secure when I leave at night. I'm always in question about whether that's the case or not, to be honest, yes.
So I hope staff considers that before we invest the money in those doors, we really should look at that whole lobby
what you're-
area to make sure that we're not having to redo something. So
Sure.
thank you. Thank you.
So the FM speaker systems that all the other schools have, I'm guessing that all the other schools have.
I don't know if they
no?
all have them. I'm just telling you things that staff
No,
notice about new schools.
No, I know Geiger has them, and
Yours
they're
don't.
fantastic.
Yeah.
I want to say to all of the board here, that is a necessity. For those children especially who have auditory processing issues, and if they can't always hear what's going on in the classroom, though that is a necessity. So I want to start looking at that. So thank
Tanya,
you.
if you would mind if I just respond to
Yeah.
that for a minute, and then I promise I'll sit down.
Yeah.
I think, it's a tool that serves two purposes. It's a tool that's effective for teachers, which means it's effective for kids. It's the same thing with the technology, with interactive technology. And I just tell you a very quick story. Just a few years ago, when I think it was my last year's AP, maybe my second to last year's AP, I had also come back from another building, and it had been a frustration of mine, but I hadn't really figured out how to advocate for this. And Bill happened to come over one day, and it was in the summer, and my family and I were eating lunch, and for some strange reason, that must have just gave me a good prompting to take Bill for a tour of our building. And what I brought him to see was that in all of our classrooms, or almost all of our classrooms at that time, our teachers in the front of their classrooms had shower boards from Home Depot that they were using to use dry erase markers on, which were covering old chalkboards for their classroom purposes. And that's just another example of that doesn't seem like a big thing. It was a really big thing. They don't clean up nice, and it says something, and it says something to staff when you go and you see, oh my gosh, there's a difference here. So following that conversation and some consultation with our facilities director at the time, we made some pretty quick adjustments, and we had quality whiteboard mounted in every classroom, and that was good for kids, and it was good for our teachers. So I think it's along the same lines type of thing. So just a need to plan for it and then support it.
I would, oh, I'm sorry. Did I cut somebody off? I would like to know if, which schools have it and which schools don't. If we could find that information out, or we could ask the principals right now. If we could.
That might be a question Dave could answer. Is that correct?
I can work with Louis Turcott, facilities wise and so forth, and I can actually have my guys go around and do a survey of what's where. I'm happy to do that.
Who besides Geiger has the FM stereo thing? Oh, I'm sorry.
To hit your
Farwell, and then you'll have it, right?
My sixth grade. So at Longley, when Linda St. Andre was here, they did some renovations over in
There was a question over here. I can't remember who raised it. Ms. Gordamash.
That's okay. I just wanted to clarify, so the painting projects includes the exterior also?
I'm going to look to Bobby for a little help on this. We looked at, when we met with the painting contractor, we broke the painting job up into 3 distinct parts. One was the exterior, all your trim up along your roof lines and so forth. One was the downstairs hallways, and the other was the upstairs hallways. And then the final piece was the security piece out front. And I don't remember the exact dollar amounts. We didn't put one of them in the budget to begin with. So I think we put 1 floor and the exterior, or it was 2 floors and not the exterior. I think we originally tried to get 2 paint jobs in for 1 year with the idea that the next year we would put in whatever the remaining paint job was. Then over the course of our budget process and working with Bill, some of that came back out in order to make things work. And that's, so I think what would end up, if you added this piece back in, you would have 2 of the 3 painting jobs, I believe, plus the doors in the front. I think that's accurate.
Learning technology. So as far as the painting is concerned, I wasn't here to develop that, so I don't know what the detail is on the painting, but I do want to ask you, Jim, a question. As far as the doors are concerned, we consider that a safety hazard, correct? And do they not lock, or are we concerned about whether they're security hazard?
Safety, I don't believe anyone's.
Okay.
Safety is security.
Yeah.
It is not a reliable system. It's not a reliable locking mechanism. It requires an extra It requires some additional steps on the part of our custodians, both in the morning and the afternoon. If those things haven't been done, you can't access the building from the front entrance, period. So I'm a holder of all keys in the building. I actually cannot access my building from that entrance unless our custodian has manually done something to the inside of that door from prior to me arriving, if that makes sense. So that is part of the security concern, is that so that either leaves that door, it's vulnerable, and it's just, it doesn't operate the way we would want it to operate.
Just a question as far as the cost itself goes. Is the 35,000 broken up into painting and door replacement, or is it the same bid?
No, I'm gonna, and thanks, Luke. So I don't have my laptop with me. That 35,000, one of the jobs was like 17,000 something. The other job was 17,000. I mean, they're right in that ballpark, both of those jobs. Each of the jobs actually, yeah, that's the schedule I'm looking for, thank you. But Amber's got it. Oh, she saved me so many times. This is great. So here you go. Replace the 4 main entry doors, 17,800. Paint the interior first floor, 17,200. Paint the exterior trim, front entry, and all gym areas. So we have a number of exit points that have little roofs over them. So each of those, and that exterior was 16,976. So basically each job's around the $17,000 mark. And as I pointed out, that's one interior job, an exterior job, and the other interior job would have been planned for the following year. So.
I will say this was the most thorough discussion on paint and doors I've ever heard, but thank you very much.
It is, and it is humorous in some ways, but I can't overstate the importance of what a building and the condition it is and its appearance says to our students, and what it says to our employees, and about what we think about them and why we're here. So, thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Ms. Gordamash?
The reason I asked about the exterior paint, The reason I asked about the exterior paint is I have been to your school frequently this school year because my daughter has strings rehearsal there often. Is my mic on? And I've noticed, I looked and noticed, and I'm a big fan of curb appeal for my own home, so I know what you're saying, so I appreciate that.
Moving on with security assessment for the district.
So, oh no, you get to stand next to me because I'm going to talk about you too. Yeah. His favorite? Okay. So, about maybe 3 weeks ago, Bill had forwarded to me a contact that he had or has, and said, "Would you please contact this company?" And they're called TRC. I don't recall what that stands for. Do you? Yeah. And so we did. We contacted them, and they provide. We met with him, and they provided us with a quote on facility risk assessments as it relates to safety in each one of our buildings in this district. And what you see in this budget, by the way, he was awesome. It was a very thorough, comprehensive quote, and the price tag was quite large. And he broke it out based on each building, and including, actually it's not including the report, is in addition to the site assessment. And what you see in this budget here is $20,000 to do a site assessment at Lewiston High School. And we would start with that building just because that's where all of our older kids are. The most students, every one of our buildings needs to have this done, in my opinion. And for that $20,000, we believe that we can get the site assessment done along with the report, the comprehensive report. And that report will tell us everything about that building. If I left anything out?
No, I think it's very obvious that that this needs to get done for every building, including this building and all the schools. And it's just a matter of being able to financially afford that, or do we piecemeal it one school or multiple schools over the course of a couple of years?
And I'd just like to add that this security company, while they have school clients, they're a general security company. And one of the reasons why doing Lewiston High School, when it's in some respects our most at-risk school, our largest school, but also I think we would learn a lot about, is this the type of service that we really want? And it's something that we can act on quickly. Once we start getting over $15,000, $20,000, we're now in a request for proposal stage, which we really aren't in a position to do anytime soon. So this was allowed us to find out about our most vulnerable asset and really assess the capability. And this could be something that could be shared with this board in executive session, and we would, I think, learn an awful lot and also help frame whether we wanted to continue with this same company or do something else.
Maybe this is a silly question. Wouldn't it have to go out to bid if we were contracting? And couldn't we possibly find cost savings there then? Is that?
So per board policy, and there's some exceptions, but I believe over $15,000, we generally would go out to bid. So we think we can get that one school done for that amount or a little less. $20K is what was on the list before we had further conversations with, because he gave us a quote for all buildings.
So what was that quote for the entire district?
It was roughly $120,000.
So I personally one, I think an assessment is a good idea, and I think we truly need to start in that direction. Are they a Maine-based company?
Yes.
Okay. There are others. I'm familiar with several different people who do those type of assessments. I think if we decide to go in that direction, we really should consider doing it as a district-wide, especially where we have a brand-new school being built. And if we can add anything to it now quickly while it's still under construction, I believe there would be cost savings. Also, if we open it up to the whole district, it would be something that would go out to bid so that we make sure we are getting the best price and evaluating other providers as well. So just my thoughts.
Any other discussion? Just to go back to what Ms. Ray was mentioning, this was one company. Were there other companies sought out?
Not yet. No. This is about 3 weeks in the making, so
Okay.
it took them 2 weeks to get the quote.
So we're just on the starting process of this. Okay, and so we'll look at just one school as well as the whole district. Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll move ahead. And we'll move ahead with adult education recommendations.
Forgot to put Bill G on there, but I knew my place. So essentially, this is kind of self-explanatory what's on here, but the adult ed budget was going to add $20,000 to the property tax assessment, and then we were going to increase our expenditures by $20,000. But what really is going to be reflected is the additional expenditures of $20,000 we're going to do through a fund balance that we have based on last year's audit. So when we look at the overall budget picture, adult education won't be going up. Additional expenditures that we plan to see next year will be covered by our fund balance. And then the third item is a preliminary estimate we got for our subsidy, and it was down $7,000. That is an estimate. I did talk to somebody at the state, and the way that when they run that, they have to give us a number, and it doesn't necessarily shake out until June when they actually know the amounts. And I'm fairly confident that that number could go up just in the conversation I had. But I had talked with Bill, and if that doesn't happen, then obviously I would identify things that we would reduce, probably in the supply area, things like that.
So just to be clear, Bill, the $20,000 reduction in property tax assessment, am I correct, would leave the property tax assessment for this coming year unchanged from this year?
Correct.
And in so doing, would take a penny off the
Correct.
city tax rate. Thank you.
Discussion from the board? Seeing none, we'll move ahead.
All right, thank you.
All right, so line item 18, Article 1, leadership stipends. I don't know who's presenting this. Is this you?
Well, we were still gathering some information today. Bobby, do you have some information to share on this? This was one of the questions that a board member had asked about getting more information.
So I don't have all of the information. I know what's sitting in the general fund. We also have additional leadership team stipends that are actually funded by federal monies. So as far as the general fund is concerned, I believe the question was, how many new leadership team stipends do you have in the budget? And I don't have the total number of new, but I can tell you how much the budget is up in the 19 budget. So it's up roughly $17,000 in leadership team. As far as the federal funds are concerned, I don't have that number yet. Do you?
So I was the one who proposed that question. The only thing I was asking for is what the total amount, the budget went up with all the new leadership stipends. So my question's been answered, but I'm not trying to cut people off, but I also don't want people to go on for more than what I asked. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kara. Is there any other discussion? We'll move ahead then. Next presentation will be done with Darren Avery in regards to the arts coordinator position.
So it's been a very exciting year for the arts, just to say that up front. And I want to thank you guys for your support in that with the building committee and looking forward to the education wing at the high school and all that. It's been a very exciting year. In saying that, in the beginning of the year, we met as a committee in September. We joined and we had a visual and performing arts committee that was formed. And at that meeting, we had discussions about where are we at, where do we want to be, what are the voids that we have in our district, and obviously the facility was number one. But beyond that, we talked about what do we need for positions in our district. And so we came up in that meeting with the media arts position, which is in the budget, I believe, for next year, and that was a priority for us to do. And then at that same meeting, we had conversations about the what ifs. And so tonight, it's on here. This is something that has been needed in Lewiston for a long, long time. But I do understand budget constraints, and I do understand where we're at. But I do want to plant a seed tonight, if anything, as you're going through process, and just explain what we're talking about in this regards. I believe that an arts coordinator position in the city of Lewiston is something that we need for many, many different venues and avenues of how we roll through education. I related to an athletic director. I look at Jason and his job. He does an awesome job at the high school. He coordinates all the teams. He markets the teams. He works with community involvement, brings in support. He brings in different things as far as marketing for all those teams. There's so many things that go into that for our athletic programs that happen after school. I believe the same thing is needed for the arts in a collective way, K through 12. The difference is we have students that are in a curricular manner, but also in a co-curricular manner, and there's nobody that oversees that. There's nobody that oversees all of the needs that we have through there. We do many of the same things, from publicity of our events, from gathering of curriculum in school, being able to have somebody that coordinates that. One of the voids that I believe, I gave a report, so I'm not going to go into everything with that. But one of the voids we have is that each building is very detached, and we never have opportunities to coordinate together. To have a streamlined education where when we inherit students at the high school, we know exactly what they've got and what we expect for them to have. Same way as a math class, you understand this math concept to get to here. There's no alignment there, unfortunately, and it's been that way for a long time. And being able to meet with teachers, somebody to coordinate that aspect, that's just one of those items. That's the curriculum aspect of things in that way. Talking about budgets, talking about schedules. I also mentioned in that report, and again, I won't get into it, but we have some real deficiencies in regards to our instrumental program as we move to the high school. Our program is probably the smallest it's ever been instrumentally right now, and I'm not saying anything that people don't know at the high school. It's very, very true. But we don't have somebody that's overseeing that at each level. And what are the problems? How are things being created? How do we transfer that? So those are some things that I believe an arts coordinator would oversee. Would be able to do that, to be able to work with administration on scheduling, on curriculum development, that aspect of in-school work. But beyond that, what about the other aspects of what we do? The arts are very different. I mean, we go through the day and afternoons and nights and weekends. There's many, many events that are going on, and this collaboration with community. I feel that we're just skimming the surface in regards to our culture and the things that we have in the city that are to offer, and we could be doing a lot better job of that by bringing people in to enrich our kids, to enrich our community, to enrich our students, and building partnerships with colleges and universities and different music groups, bringing the Portland Symphony in. I was in a different district at one point in my career, and we had the Portland Symphony come every year and do instruction for kids, and that inspired kids to be instrumentalists and to be able to move forward and to build upon that curriculum and not just drop off once they get to 6th grade and come to the middle school and explore other things. It was inspiring for kids, and it brought that motivation, and it brought the arts to a forefront. And as we know, we've been talking about, we're really looking forward to a building that screams the arts in Lewiston. And none of us were here when it was built in 1973 and put in the dungeon of the basement of Lewiston. it's time for that to change. And I think that as we look forward and as we move forward in what we're trying to develop in Lewiston, that a position like this on that level is really needed in order to bring all the pieces together to work and function in the way that it needs to be. So, so my intent tonight is just to plant that seed with you. I know there's a number there. That's something that we came up with HR. I believe that it's beyond a teacher contract. I believe it's an administrative position that is a full year position on, you know, building support, grant writing. There's so many aspects of that job to bring the arts to where they should be in Lewiston, and I believe that's a position that, as we build upon what we're doing this year, should be in our system. So, any questions?
Discussion from the board? Ms. Roy?
I don't have a question really, I just have a comment that some of these efforts have been tried, even through, I remember being on the Music Boosters, and we try to coordinate in the basement at 7:30 at night, trying to get some of these things together so that there was a seamless transition, that the high school could help the elementary schools and all of that, and it's almost an impossible thing to do from the volunteer level. And this is important to students. This is the reason why some kids go to school. So I just wanted to say it is important, and thank you for speaking to it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So coordinating the arts curriculum, under PBL, isn't there a curriculum already decided on for standards for our arts, K-12?
Absolutely. And so there's, you know, that's driven by the state, by national standards. The difference is that I think there's gaps in the way that we're doing things. And I say that in a way of this. If we have schedules that a student might be a music's my background. So we see a student that might have music instruction during their 7th grade year, have nothing, and then all of a sudden, you know, by the time they get to high school, I'm reteaching the basic concepts that we expect these students to have at the high school level. You know, we've worked hard, you know, through email conversations and, you know, very fragmented times to meet together to say, here's what we want kids to learn. You know, the middle school, Mr. Rule saying, here's what I want the concepts to be from elementary to middle. Here's what we want concepts to be from middle school to high school. There's no time. There's no collaboration there. There's nobody driving that train to be able to work those things together. So we work independently between schools, but as far as that coordination of things, those are things that I believe would be helpful to have somebody to coordinate.
To add to that, earlier you mentioned as an example, Jason in his position as athletic director. And I like to say, you know, imagine not having him there. How fragmented the sports program would eventually fall apart, and as compared to whatever it is today. That's what happened 40 years ago, or plus years ago, when the high school decided not to go with an arts program with the theater, and it kind of went where it is today. And this is just one way to take inventory of where our district is and to strengthen it, not only in our education, not only with each individual school, but how they can work together and as well throughout our community. And I think that's where this stems from. And it came out of the Visual and Performing Arts Committee, but I don't want folks to confuse this as being part, once that theater or that department is created, that this position will go away. It certainly wouldn't. It would just be an asset to that. And when we do build a theater, there'll be hopefully a theater manager as well to take care of that building and that structure as well. So just to see that these are two different things going on in this direction.
So now you're starting to scare me, though. Another position. So I'd like to follow up on Monique's statement that there are many students are here because of the arts. Do we know, and I don't expect you to give me a number concrete, but do we have an idea of what that population is within the district?
As far as students involved in the music itself?
You know, yeah, how many students is arts important to? Just.
So I think that's a hard number to grab on.
I know.
Can you hit the button?
Oh, shoot, sorry. There we go. You know, students are exposed to the arts, you know, K through 6 in multiple ways, right? They're given those specials as we call them, and they're influenced by the arts all day long. One of the things that we do is we do have instrumental program for all of our elementary students that is choice driven. So students are able to take, bands or strings, based upon their choice. We're trying to create ways to open that up for more students. We have financial needs when you talk about a strings program where, to buy an instrument or to, have enough instruments in our district to outfit every kid. That's huge. That's huge cost. Greg Boardman actually has been working this year on trying to do that. And I don't know if he's gone through that process, but he's been able to find ways to get more instruments through things. So to put a true number on it, it's very, very hard. I will say that in past years, looking at, for instance, our all-city band concert that we do, instrumentally, those kids in grades 5 and 6 were usually around 70 to 80 kids that Zach has in his program. Again, Zach's the only instrumental teacher in our whole district. I believe that's a void as well. But he's the only one that controls our whole city as an instrumental teacher for all those schools. So for him to get those 70 or 80 kids all together after school, transportation issues, those kind of things, that limits kids. I think that truly limits the amount of people that we have involved because of things like that. Again, areas that we could look at if somebody was overseeing that. Then we go to the middle school, and because of different conflicts and things, those numbers have dropped down to about 35 to 40 instrumental program. And then again, because of different things, the high school program currently is around 30 instrumentally. Vocally, at the high school, I'm over 110, close to 120 kids involved throughout my whole program. That tends to be a trend. Vocally, it's easier because it's less cost with instrumentation and that kind of thing. So I know that's rough where we're going with that. It's hard to pinpoint the true number. But I do believe as we grow and as we have a facility that we're working towards, that's part of it. And I even said in the paper, I'll bet my salary that our numbers will double because of the fact that the arts will be appreciated and brought to a forefront. So,
thank you. And so, if I could direct this to the chair, you were the one who put this on the list for further discussion. So, are your hopes that this position would be funded this year, or planning for the future if the art center is approved through this community?
This has well, it certainly involves the Visual and Performing Arts Center. Certainly, it will involve that, but this is more for the district right now. This is lacking, and it's missing that we're missing this component right now. So, for instance, and Mr. Avery can certainly give you another example. We certainly have call for certain things. People are like, well, how come we're not using XYZ piece of equipment? Why are we not using XYZ uniform? If you see his or in other folks in the arts department and their schedule, there's not enough time and there's not enough people to provide all the services all the students need currently. And we're adding a certain a classroom, of course, and we have stipends for different programs after school as well. But so by having that lack as well, we're losing a lot of money, as in the $60,000 for a position will actually save us money long term if we can strengthen our arts. And think of it as if we did not have Jason Fuller doing sports, how disorganized we would be and how much money would be going out the door by not having somebody kind of mapping it all out for the district. Think of it, that's, hopefully I explained it well enough, but that's kind of an example.
I'm not good at this. Okay. In the arts, it only starts with the day. And then all of the after-school things that teachers are not compensated for, we still have to go through. We still have to do. We have to promote ourselves. We have to build publicity for ourselves. We have to take time and coordinate for ourselves. All those aspects of things are not included in what we as teachers do. We have teacher responsibilities, but the arts go so much further, and we all know that. Weekends, nights, so forth. That's what we're talking about. Being able to have somebody that oversees that to get community support from that. I think this is a very community driven kind of position. Being able to work with Bates and to have students come in and do workshops and leadership trainings and inspirational things with that. Be able to raise funds through community to help with those kind of situations. We only do it when it falls in our lap. When the military calls upon us and says, "Hey, we're bringing the military band to Maine. Are you available?" Well, absolutely, please do. But who's that person going out and calling, Yale University and bringing their groups in, or talking to Bates, or doing this kind of? We don't have that. We don't have the time to do that. So overseeing all these things and those opportunities is what I see a position like this being able to do, to enrich our students in that way. Sure.
Some other things that there are missed opportunities sometimes. We get asked to do things like have our singers sing the national anthem at Sea Dogs games, and I mean, all these different events that we could be showcasing our students and their talents. I know that you don't have all the time in the world to do all those things. There's also all of the plays and the drama coordinating. I mean, how many volunteers does it take to put a show on? And it's for multiple days. There's a venue involved. There's food and all kinds of things I mean, the amount of people involved for doing that. And then that's not including like District 2 and those concerts that if we were bringing more of those to our city, that would also bring their dollars with them when they come to go out to eat afterward or stay in hotels because it's multiple days. It's a lot of stuff. So I just wanted to.
Management of our current facility at LMS, I believe that we use that for our in-house, fairly well. Even the organization of that, however, we don't have it. We conflict all the time. I had a situation this year where I had a scheduled rehearsal and went in, and something else happened, and we shifted and went out. We try to do that the best we can, and we do have someone who oversees that. But I believe that that's a venue we could be using. I believe, that we could bring in community, and we could bring in enrichment, and we could help our community in that way with the facility we have currently. The other thing that doesn't happen, and I brought this up at different venues, is that when we create venue, we're able to put back into that building. We're able to put back into that theater, and someone needs to oversee that, needs to be able to manage all those things. We have equipment needs that we're not able to meet in that building right now because there's nothing being put into it and there's nobody overseeing that. So there's many different things there that people need to have knowledge of and to do that. Just another example, in the theater, there's only 3 of us that actually outfit that whole theater in regards to sound and lights for the community. So when we do have events come in or the school events come in, I've been called in the middle of the day, "Darren, get over here quick. I have no idea what's going on, how to do this." We need people to train how to use the sound equipment, how to use the lighting equipment. And I believe, again, I see that as an overseeing administrative thing to set those plans in place. So that's just another aspect of things that could be with this position. So, anything else?
And we could go on with different examples all day long.
Sure.
Yep. And so this is a coordinator for the district. When we get to the theater someday, hopefully we'll get to that road and talk about a theater manager. But just to touch on that a tiny bit, of all the theaters I've been in the Northeast, the ones that just have a custodian that open the door and just let everybody in are not successful. They just are a dusty dust bowl which have performances on stage. Small little tiny theaters like the one in Gardner, Maine, are vibrant and busy in the community because they have a theater manager and they are a true asset to the community and they're happy. It's a small 400 seat theater, but they put on shows. They bring in big acts and big acts as in for that size theater and so forth. But the community is involved and it pays for itself. But that's just that. And that's down the road. But for this, it could be something of taking inventory, not only of the educational aspect, but for small things. And I'll do a plug. Geiger has a performance coming up. You can probably touch upon that a little bit. I saw that you shared it. Is it Dr. Seuss? Mary Poppins, thank you. That was last year, something like that. So they have a Mary Poppins coming up at Geiger, and they do a fantastic job. I've seen some shows there. But I was surprised that they have an excellent audio system. They do a good job with that, and one of the teachers operates that very effectively. They have some really modern lighting equipment, but they don't have the board to run the lights or the lights to go with it. So they have lighting equipment with no lights and no board to go with it.
Right.
So someone like a coordinator could take inventory of the whole district, and maybe it's at the high school, and help bring that there for that show and train the students how to use it and so forth. So there are things like that too, that we invested into our schools to have this equipment, but it's not functioning. So it's kind of like waste of money for us to have something like that. Just as another example. So thank you very much. Any other discussion from the board? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Moving on with the walking school bus.
So Farwell and Longley are the only two schools that have had walking school bus experiences here. And was this money for Farwell? That, yeah. So Amanda can talk briefly to that.
So this was actually one of the items that was on my list of things to cut out of the Farwell budget. I had initially put in $6,500 to pay staff. We're up to about 45 minutes in the morning and 45 minutes in the afternoon that the walking school bus takes. So I had initially put that in, but then it was on the list of items that were going to be that I cut in order of priority. And then after hearing from a couple of you, we went ahead and put it back on Bobby's list of things to talk about again. To be perfectly honest with you, I do think the walking school bus is fun and it's a convenience for some of the parents, but it's a different purpose than it would be at Longley, and I'll let Christy speak about that. The kids that are on the walking school bus at Farwell are kids that do not have attendance concerns. They come to school every day. They have always come to school every day other than your occasional illness. So for Farwell, it's a very different purpose, and I am comfortable not having that next year. Even though, like I said, it's fun. It's a nice time. Luke could speak about his experiences with it. It's nice to connect with the kids. It's nice to go out and get a nice walk in. And of all the things that we need, I don't think it's the highest on my priority for Farwell. But it's a totally different ball game at Longley. Did you have questions for me? Okay.
Opening it up to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, to speak on it, I do volunteer with the Farwell Walking School Bus Program Monday and Wednesday afternoons. I can't speak highly enough about the program. I mean, it's great. The kids really enjoy it. It gets them good exercise. They get to walk home. It's just a great program. I really can't speak highly enough about it. That being said, I would really have to agree with Principal Winslow. I mean, the students the situation at Longley is different from the situation at Farwell for a lot of students. So it makes absolute sense to have it at Longley, and I would be very, very, very alerted, probably more upset, maybe a better term, if we didn't have that program. So even being part of it at Farwell, I would, as a board member, have a pretty tough time justifying adding 9,000. I think leaving it out is the right choice, although down the road, it would be a cool program to expand. Thank you.
Further discussion? Ms. Ray?
Thank you. So I would love to hear from Principal Clark, if possible. But I think part of my asking for this to be on the list as well was hearing a lot of concerns about pickup and parking and all the vehicular possibilities within these parking lots, and not ever really going by the schools at pickup time. I don't know what that looks like, so I figured this might alleviate some of that. But I'd like to hear how it impacts student attendance at Longley before moving on.
Thank you. I meant no disrespect when I said I didn't know if you wanted me. I just don't want to
assume you want to hear from everything I have to say. Yes, at Longley, it is, the purpose is very intentional for the program. It is to target and address chronic absenteeism and tardy students, especially our youngest students at Longley, our kindergarten, first and second graders, a couple of third graders, and it's only in the morning. And it really, we looked at 4 years ago when I started at Longley, we implemented it that year as a way to address our tardy students, knowing that we had kiddos that were late every day and missed the start of their day or missed breakfast and would get it late. And so we really looked at the data, Jana Mates and I, and put this in place the beginning of that year so that we could get kids to school on time, because all the research shows if they're not at school learning, then they're missing out on a lot. And so we target the littlest because the older kids are more likely to walk the younger students to school. Parents walk them, but oftentimes things happen in families or other littler children at home that slow the process down and the morning routines down, so parents are often late. Excuse me. And so really was a way to support families and students. And so I pay staff ed techs in the morning to go out a half hour before school starts, and parents fill out a permission slip ahead of time. We have the same expectations they would have on a regular bus in terms of they have to listen, stay on the sidewalk, follow expectations. And we have every morning anywhere from 20 to 25 kids that go, and parents expect it. And the only times I don't ask staff to go out is if the weather is unsafe or the sidewalks aren't plowed or too icy, because I want to protect staff, and that way I have parents. We call parents and say the walking bus is not working, not going out today, so you need to bring your kids. But that's to protect, our staff, my staff. But they really enjoy doing it, and parents do miss it if we, don't do it. So, and our data has shown it gets kids to school on time.
Could you just explain how you fund your program, please?
Yes, I pay 2 or 3 ed techs already on staff, ed techs, and so they get an extra half hour in their pay at their regular rate of pay. So when Elaine Runyon and I budgeted it out a year ago for the local budget, I knew the ed techs would be interested, because it's the same ladies that have done it for several years. Prior to last year, it was grant funded through federal grant monies, aligned to our absenteeism rate and our tardiness, and then we found that wasn't sustainable, so we actually went a year without grant monies and without the walking school bus. And let me just tell you, our data went way up, and our parents were upset, or not upset, but they missed it. Another thing I'd like to mention too, it gives us the opportunity to build connections with families and to see them in their setting. So the 3 staff members that do this every morning, and it's only in the morning, it's not in the afternoon, they really enjoy it, and they've built solid connections with kids. It's like this special thing they get to do. The kids are on the walking school bus, and if you're ever at Longley in the morning, you'll see them all coming down the sidewalk. We have special umbrellas that we've had donated, and safety vests for the staff. So I fund it through the regular budget, ed techs. It's in the salary line, Article 1 under ed techs.
Ms. Ray, then Ms. Quartermash.
So I guess this question is likely for Bobby then. What is the or maybe for Principal Clark, what is the Longley portion of this 9,000 listed here?
Longley has, I believe, 6,000 or 6,500, so I'm not sure where this 9,000 came from. That wasn't something that I added this year. It was put, like I said, it was added to Longley budget a year ago.
That's just, okay, thank you.
Any others? Seeing none, we'll move ahead to ed techs for duty aids. Who's presenting? Mr. Webster?
So a few years ago, maybe several years ago, it was added in the teacher's contract that we would hire a duty aide, at least one duty aide for every building, and we do indeed have that. one of the challenges in adding more duty aides is that if they're an Ed Tech 1, is they have very limited responsibilities that they can cover. So it's much more effective to have an Ed Tech 2 or an Ed Tech 3 because they can be working directly with students in an academic setting as well. Unfortunately, our Ed Tech positions are the hardest to fill because of this job market. We have and have had over 30 open Ed Tech positions all year, even though from an Ed Tech standpoint, our wages and benefits are very comparable, if not superior to the surrounding districts. So even if we were to add Ed Techs, I think based on experience, we would have a hard time filling those positions.
Discussion from the board? Mr. Jensen.
I've brought up the the topic of duty aids quite a bit in like my 14, 15 months on the board. A lot of it stemming from when I was subbing in Lewiston schools before being appointed to the board, and something that really stood out to me was particularly the burden, the workload for teachers, particularly at the elementary level. So I'm very supportive of more duty aids. I do see the problem though of, if we can't fill the spots, then it kind of puts us in a bind. But I just want to reiterate my desire to see more duty aid coverage, give teachers a little bit more planning time, more free periods to prep, that kind of stuff. Thanks.
I just want a little bit more clarification here. So these are Ed Tech positions that you want to make into duty aids, is that correct? Am I reading that?
So our duty aids would be essentially at the Ed Tech 1 level, generally. We have one of the things that has happened, and we've got principals that could probably speak to it better than I, but we have some schools that, because we've added so many Ed Tech positions in other areas, that has helped relieve some of the duties that otherwise would have been assigned to teachers. Because we have, even though we've got 30 open positions, we have had, I want to say, if we have, and my numbers may be off a little bit, but if we have 260 Ed Techs today in Lewiston Public Schools, I've got to believe that 5 years ago the number was under 200.
Well, just to add to what you said, so yes, in the previous contract budget, we've added more Ed Techs. So we're actually further ahead now than I think that we were last year about level if we were to go with last year's numbers. So we've added Ed Techs, but we've and we're also looking specifically for Ed Tech 2s, I believe, with BHPs. So we're really looking for, and we love those. I mean, we really want those. But what I'm reading here, I just want to make sure, Ed Techs for duty aids, are you saying that we're going to take the 30 vacancies and make them into Ed Tech 1 duty aids, or these are additional?
No, we just put them on the list the way it was. Member Jensen had suggested that we should look at adding more duty aids to assist teachers in duties.
And I'm not familiar with how the contract works, but maybe we could take the vacancies, and because here I'm seeing an additional 30,000 plus, so I don't know if we can maybe take what we need from our current openings and just convert them into duty aids. I don't know if that's even allowed from contract and budget. So.
Why don't we let one of the principals speak to duties? That'd be good.
I understand the responsibilities. I'm just seeing if we can take it from. I don't think.
So I remember when Martell. Oh. When Martell and Longley were presenting their budget, I remember Luke bringing that up, and I think the year before, Martell was asking for an additional duty aid, and I remember you asking about that. So at McMahon, and I know this is similar at Montello, we have 2 duty aides. They're awesome. They do about 5 recess or lunch duties every day, and then they help with some other office tasks in the morning or afternoon. And then at McMahon, all of our ed techs, unless they're like a one-on-one, also do 1 lunch or recess for the day, so that helps cover a lot of it. And then my teachers do 1 lunch throughout the week and 1 recess throughout the week. So 3 days a week they get a longer lunch than their contractual 25-minute. They get the recess and lunch off, and then once or twice a week they do a duty, which we like to they're called duties, but they're also really opportunities for connecting with kids on the playground, in the lunchroom, and other places. So I think that it's pretty fair. Our ed techs do more of it. So I'm feeling pretty good on our duty aid side. I have other things that I would ask for before that. Any questions about duty aids, ed tech roles?
All right, moving ahead to the Martell elimination of RTI teacher, 50,000.
So Principal Clark is prepared to talk about what we see the benefits of that position. It is a new position, though.
So I am in a unique position tonight to be here on behalf and advocating for a position that Principal Whitfield originally talked to me about, feeling that's a position that he feels his school needs, and I agree with him. And so although I'm not in the building and I haven't been the principal obviously at Martell this year, I would like to share with you what I see the vision for this position being. And I feel like at the budget presentation earlier this year, I wasn't maybe as clear as I could have been for you in the importance of this position. First of all, I would like to just share that I feel the Martell staff and children for several years have had, I believe, some of the largest class sizes in the district, and in a building that is subpar. And so the reason I bring that up is because it's about not just equity for all students, because this position is in 2 other buildings already in the district, but it's about the response to intervention. And all the research shows that when you can address and support children at the earliest stage possible for pre-K, K, first, second, third, then you make a difference in their academic achievement long term. And so that's what this position is about. This position is about supporting students, a teaching position, supporting students not only on literacy, math, science, whatever the intervention might be or the need might be based on data, but looking at those students as well that struggle with social emotional skills. It's no secret that we're seeing that as a need across all schools here in Lewiston, and Martell is one of those schools as well that has the need. And they've seen it a lot this year when many of their special ed staff were used to support non-special ed students for part of the day. Some special ed staff were used most of the day to support kids who weren't in special ed. And what I mean by support is teaching them social emotional skills, maybe working with them academically, because what we know in RTI law is that you have to provide evidence that you have tried several things, data-based, and collect data before you can go to special ed referral. Unless, of course, it's just a parent request. But as educators, we have strict regulations that we have to follow. And so an RTI teacher, what that person would do is provide those opportunities that the mainstream teachers can't necessarily do, because often kids need smaller settings, fewer children. They need more time. They need other opportunities, whether it be social, emotional, or academics. The other thing I would just like to also mention is that we do not need the new wall built, the $2,500 for this position to be successful. So I know that is on here. I'm fine. If that is why, if you're thinking, you know, Martell's an old school, they can't do the position without the wall or the construction, I wanted to share with you, that is not necessary. As a new administrator coming into the school, I feel fresh eyes, a fresh administrative team can maybe look at the data, look at the needs of the school, and really target what the Martell kids need for this, and use this position as a way to really give some kids some services and some support, and also the teachers who have struggling kids in their classrooms, and the other kids in those classrooms with the struggling few that might be derailing the whole learning environment, some opportunities that they haven't had. One of the things that I'm hearing more and more as an incoming principal is that Martell students and teachers have not had a lot of the similar supports, or children haven't had the same supports that maybe some other kids in Lewiston have had, and it's time that is looked at, and so I would ask your support with that. The other piece about Martell is there's no in-school suspension position there. And I can see this RTI teacher perhaps filling some of that role. So instead of suspending students out or giving students an opportunity, maybe their behavior is not in a place where they can access their education, but yet they don't necessarily need to be sent home. They can do their learning in the school in a different environment. I can see this position also covering some of that need as well. Again, it's going to be about teaching the students that are struggling and need these interventions based on looking at the data. I think that's all I had to say. So thank you for listening, and I would strongly like to advocate for that position.
So I was the one that asked to have that placed for further discussion. Can you tell me, so my thinking was, I'll share why I asked for that. An old school that's going to be vacated soon, why start a new program? Why not just wait until it moves to the new school and then address those issues? So feel free to respond to that original thinking.
Thank you for that question. It's not a new program. What it is it's an opportunity to provide students with supports that they haven't had. It's really, and that they haven't had and that they need, says the special ed director who's it's response to I'm trying to think about a way to explain this as clearly as possible. Response to intervention is, and this teacher is about, it's not a black and white cut and dry like box program that would come and we'd roll it out. It's really about using our schools, what I hope to be a new leadership team at Martell of teachers, and looking at students across all disciplines, literacy, math, behavior, looking at office referrals, looking at where they struggle, and problem solving around academic needs and targeting those kids and giving them what they need that they may not have from other educational experiences like pre-K experiences, or maybe we get many kids that move in to Lewiston from other districts. They may not have reading recovery experiences or other research-based interventions that we can really target and look at. And this RTI teacher would be the teacher that would do that for kids. And again, that's my vision. I know it may look different at Montello and at McMahon. But again, in my mind, it's really based on the needs of the school and the students in the school. And it's not just, okay, you come because, it's your turn. It's really about the data.
Can I continue? So did they try last year to get this position and was denied? Do you know?
I don't believe so.
All right, so
I know this year, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I just don't understand the urgency to do it before the new school this year.
So if I may, I see it as an opportunity to get some systems in place around RTI for a staff that it has been lacking in terms of opportunities for students and staff looking at data across all content areas before the new school opens. We're going to be asking for several other positions probably a year from now to help open the new school as well. I mean, I understand, but that our kids struggling don't have a year to wait
All right,
to
well,
get caught up.
And that makes sense to me, so I appreciate that answer. How many kids do you think this would directly impact?
Well, the RTI model is 80% of your school should be meeting expectations, and in that tiered approach. Some of you that work with Martell students and staff, Pam, Hillary, I haven't looked at Martell's data at this point. I hope. I would like to think at least.
And the hope is prevention. And so if we start utilizing RTI, we have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3.
I don't even know.
Students going into special ed services.
Mhm.
Case in point, and why I think the urgency was, we had a group of 5 students who were pretty intense, and they did not have any RTI services, and so they were pulling from special ed. Not that that's a problem, but they weren't identified in special ed. And so the teachers that were providing those interventions and the ed techs that were providing those interventions, again, were from this side of the world. When had we had something in place for those students, they would not have moved into special ed to get these services. So it really is a tiered approach from ground in the classroom, what they're supposed to be doing, tier 2, tier 3. And then if, after all that, and there's different, like 6 weeks, and all of those wonderful things, and if the data is not improving, then we look at a special ed referral. So this is something we should be doing district-wide, and this should be something that we truly are focusing on as a district to kind of lower those numbers. So if I just
I just wanted to add one thing on this that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what this does is add to Martell a program or a process which is already in existence at all other schools.
Yes, thank you, Mr.
And
Webster.
I think the difference is that, we're going through a transition at Martell to new leadership, and I think this is the one of the programs that has been identified as the school very much in need, irrespective of any new school.
That's right.
So to answer your question around the projected number of students, I think that was, it's hard to estimate because different students would need different interventions. Different interventions may be done one-on-one for highly intensive interventions. It could be done in a small group, no more than 5, but a small group. Some students would progress rather quickly when they have that additional support. And so they move through an intervention in for like 6 to 12 weeks. Other kids may take longer. So it's a little bit hard to project. To what Phil said, RTI, this is already established in all of our schools. RTI is the expectation of the state. So we have Martell has an RTI process. They have an RTI team. The difficult part and why they're pulling from special ed is in order to meet the law and provide students with extra support who are struggling in the classroom, they don't have the staff to do that. So we have a process with absolutely no resources to follow the process. And that's why special ed is being pulled.
I'll be brief. I'll wrap this up quickly. So Sean helped me today understand RTI and the importance of it, and understand that it's federal and state mandated. How long has that been that? And this will be 2 questions. I'll give them to you both so I can stop talking.
2009 the law was passed.
Okay. And have you guys seen, is there evidence based to support that it actually does keep kids out of special ed? Have you guys seen?
Yes.
I think many schools struggle with appropriate funding.
And the interventions of the strategy. So the more that we can front load on this end and provide those interventions.
May I share a quick story about one of my students 2 years ago? I promise I'll be brief. I know it's a long night. Just here's a perfect example of how RTI works. So my second year at Longley, I had family language learners move in. And after about a month, she was a second grader. Her teacher was like, I'm going to referral. This little girl, she can't read, she's not learning, blah, blah. There's a process at Longley before teachers are allowed to do a referral. And I said, you know what? I'm pushing back. We're not going to referral. She's just moved into our school. We don't know that she came from out of state. I said, I don't know. We don't know what kind of teaching she's had. We don't know if she's even had top quality teaching. We haven't tried enough interventions. I'm going to put her in my literacy interventionist. We're going to put her in a group with our reading recovery teacher, which wasn't reading recovery, but it was a literacy intervention. It was a one-on-one intervention. That little girl today is in 4th grade and reading on level, and she's not a special ed student. And my teacher came to me later in that year and thanked me personally and thanked us for pushing back, holding that line, and looking again at what the student really needed and problem solving outside of the box to make sure that we were meeting her needs. And so that is what we do at Longley. That is what we do in most Lewiston schools, and that is what I'm going to do at Martel for kids.
I have Martel in my district, and I know many, 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 many kids that go there. And RTI has benefited a few of them. There's one little boy that lived in the same complex I do that I would physically take to school because grandmother couldn't. He didn't want to do the work, and it was RTI interventions that got him to focus, and he's now, I believe, in 3rd grade and bringing home A's. Well, what they would call A's. It's probably a 3 now. But he is so proud of himself that every time he gets his little report card, he has to come and show me because he learned. So it did work, and Martel has a need for it that has increased over the years.
Any further discussion from the board? Thank you. Moving forward with STEM teachers for the elementary schools.
So we weren't quite sure what this was asking, whether it was to eliminate the additions to STEM. There are 2 STEM programs in our schools now at McMahon and Farwell. And this budget includes adding 3 more positions. Actually, one of those is a position that was funded, that was authorized this year, but it's in the budget for the first time next year. So both Amanda and Amber can speak to the benefits of STEM if that's what the board wants, but I wasn't quite sure what that line meant.
So I yelled STEM, put it on the list. I just wanted to make sure that, because it's my belief that there should be a STEM program in every elementary school. And I guess I just wanted to explore a little bit more about what we are doing for STEM in the buildings and what schools are missing it and why weren't those positions asked for.
So with what's in the budget, Farwell and McMahon presently have their program, and then we would be adding it at Longley and Martel. And I guess I would ask Jim and Cindy to update us on Montello and Geiger. So there is a STEM teacher in here from Montello? Okay. Okay. So
I was just going to note that I do have in my notes here during Principal Cliff's presentation the addition of a STEM teacher for 40K. Thanks, Luke.
And maybe Cindy will clarify this, but in her notes, it said that there's a half-time STEM teacher to share with Farwell that was not in the budget. But Farwell has a
No,
position?
so I'll clarify that. So we had asked in our original first draft, before it kind of came to you, that Amanda and I were going to share a full-time teacher position, and that would be able to service all of Farwell School and half of Geiger. So it would have provided STEM classes to our grades 4, 5, and 6, because we're a larger school. We would have more classes, and it could do all of the classes at Farwell. When we made the initial cuts, that was one of the things that we had cut from the budget. Farwell currently has a STEM ed tech position, so they have a stipend position at Farwell that they pay an ed tech to do that. And she's currently servicing those classes where we do not have that. So currently our students, their fifth unified arts, and I would agree with Jim, is counseling and is the guidance. And that's not really a unified arts class. But that's our way of kind of providing that fifth unified arts period so that teachers have that common planning daily. So if you want to add it back in, I'd love to have one full-time at Geiger.
The only other thing I wanted to add in about that is because it kind of started with this idea. So Amanda had a regular ed tech and then really wanted to pull in the science, piece of that when thinking about math and science interventions. And then I had 2 guidance counselors, and then I eliminated one guidance counselor and made that into a STEM position. So in both of our cases, it was just kind of funky working with what we already had. And then it's been so successful. And I was like, Jim, you got to come see my, STEM lab and the teacher planning that it's adding and the enrichment to the curriculum. So I think that's where it kind of then came like, wow, this is really great. So there's a few new positions in there eventually. Not asking for it this year, but I'd love to get that guidance counselor back, you know what I mean, in addition to that second one again. But that's a little bit on the history of the STEM teacher and kind of where it came from with our ideas. So it wasn't that anyone was missing out or we were trying not to be equitable.
And if I could just add one more thing. I think Farwell's in a different position where they have an ed tech that's both capable and willing to do that position. And I think we do have some strong ed techs at Geiger, but I'm not sure that there would be one that would be willing to take that on to take on that extra planning time. So it's not a position that we would have available for next year for our students.
So in summary, if this budget is adopted as presented, every elementary school except Geiger would have a STEM program. Is that correct?
I think it sounds like that.
And
I mean, we could work to try to fit it in with a stipend position like Farwell's doing. If we could find an ed tech over the summer that would be willing to do that. We do have a couple of regular ed tech positions in our budget. So we could, work that through somehow.
But am I also correct, one of the challenges, if we were to go with what you originally planned, is that your ed tech who's doing bang-up job at Farwell would not qualify to be a teacher?
But I would be more than willing to take her other half to make it a full-time at Geiger.
Okay, thank you.
That's quite the suggestion. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll move ahead. This is for someone who inquired about EdTech 3 average salary and benefits. I don't remember who asked that, but there you go. No? Yes, Bobby, go ahead, hit the button there. Yep.
That's for information purposes only.
There you go, just for information. Anybody want to ask questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll move ahead to Ruth's reusable resources. Who's presenting?
So this is actually information that Bobby had gathered. Originally, we thought that we might be able to get a district membership for not that much different than what was already in the budget, but it would cost $9,000 more to have it district-wide or for elementary. I think we have 2 schools presently that are in the program that love it, but it would be $9,000 more to move it district-wide.
Discussion from the board? I see some wheels turning, but no comments. Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this, I just want to be clear because there's quite a bit here. For this 9,423, is that already included in the budget? It's not. Okay. Okay. I guess thinking that, I know Ms. Avery presented at a recent meeting about this. I got to say, I'm pretty supportive. It really seems like it'd be worth the extra charge based on the presentation I remember we received a few meetings ago. Those are just my thoughts on it.
I got there. Would any, okay, how do I phrase this? The reusable resources, would that lessen the cost of any resources from up above, like K-12 instructional supplies, or is that not an apples to apples thing we could predict or do them?
From the middle school perspective, definitely looking to replace some of the instructional equipment, some of the bigger pieces of furniture more specifically. It's also allowed for a lot of supplementing for like the PBIS and incentives for kiddo stuff that we can't justify through instructional supplies and equipment, but teachers know are incentives that they need to have for kids. And then also just supplementing day-to-day supplies for kids, backpacks, string backpacks, notebooks, things that we would expect a student to be able to bring when you send home that supply list at the beginning of the year or, beginning of the trimester or something that a lot of our students can access. I mean, we ran the report. I can't even tell you how many 3-ring binders and notebooks we were able to get. So yeah, in the big picture, definitely.
I want to echo committee member Jensen's sentiment that I'm fully in support. I mean, 9,000 is a large number, but we saw how much larger the savings are over the years for just a couple schools using it. I think there has to be an intentional application and doing ride shares down to Portland to go use the resource since a lot of our teachers live in this community and that is a hour drive. But I'm really in support of moving that back into the necessary funding.
And Miss Avery also pointed out how much we've used over the last, I think it was 5 years you pointed out, and that was a pretty significant number. Oh, Ms. Quartermash has it.
I wrote here that it was from 2013 to date is about a $750,000 savings. If I wrote that correctly.
And it'd be interesting to, if we do move ahead, to see what we got out of it from this budget for next year, so we can review that. Any other discussion from this board? Moving ahead to the student and staff support of the climate vendor survey. Is that just informational, or don't we get? Okay.
I talked about this last week in my budget presentation. It costs just a little over $19,000 for us to have an outside vendor, which is Cambridge Ed, help coordinate our student climate survey, our parent climate survey, and our staff climate survey. We offered to pull that in. We kept $2,000 in the budget if we were going to bring it in-house to cover any sort of expenses there. That comes out by pulling this out of the budget. We don't get the same sort of level of dynamic reporting. There's a lot of man hours in actually developing the surveys. We also lose the opportunity to do some apples to apples comparison on some very important data that helps with school improvement planning, because the items that we use on those surveys are proprietary to the vendor. So that's what that item is.
This was very concerning to me, just because of, as you stated, the man hours, testing a survey when there are vendors that already have checked reliability. Are there any other vendors that have a lower cost that we could look into? Or is this just the one that you use, that's the one that you know?
This is the one that we've been working with for a number of years. I actually think for the level of service they provide, it seems to be we haven't really bid it out or looked for other vendors. Again, anytime you change a vendor or you change the way you're administering the survey, you lose the opportunity for those items that are proprietary to the vendor. So we could do our own survey. We wouldn't be able to use the same items. We'd have to doctor them up, and that loses our ability to look at progress year to year. And comparability. As it stands now, we've changed the survey a little bit over time. We think we've gotten to a place where we're looking at school climate broadly from the standpoint of 3 different stakeholders. We're no longer doing that individual student perception survey that sort of gave the classroom view. We're looking more from that broader school standpoint. So it's really the first year we're using these 3 comparable surveys together. If we were to bring it in-house next year, all the data we gathered this year would be apples to, well, maybe a green apple to a Brayburn in some ways, but it still wouldn't be the pure look that we would hope to get that allows us to do some school improvement planning over time. That being said, we did, looking at all the other needs that you've heard tonight that go directly to student needs. When we had this conversation that, one of the things I brought up and, Dave agreed, and I think a lot of management team, we were saying, well, if it meant putting that amount back in the budget to get something that was a little closer to the students, we were willing to give it up. But you are right, we are losing a lot of benefits in having that outside vendor do that for us.
So what has been the direct impact then for using this data? What do you feel is the importance of what you've gotten to this place where you feel good about it? What is the direct impact on students from these kinds of surveys?
I think the direct impact, again, the impact is shifting. When we did student perception survey data, it really allowed teachers to reflect not just on how students were doing academically, but how is my approach to working with students, providing them with the academic rigor they're looking for. Do all my students feel like I care for them, that I keep them safe, that I really care about them as individuals? Looking at it from a school climate standpoint, we get that same look, but schools can sort of look and say, what is this atmosphere? What is the student experience here in this school? So this is really going to be our first year that we can look broadly from all 3 stakeholders because we haven't done a family survey in the past. So I think the impact is really looking at this data alongside academic data in your whole picture of, so what goals then do we have for school improvement? Goals that we have for improving not just student social emotional learning and academic achievement, but perhaps staff morale. What are some needs we have around the workload and experience of our educators who are on the front lines working with students? How are parents perceiving what we're doing? We're putting a lot of energy and effort into our communication efforts with parents, for example. How are they perceiving that, and how is that enhancing their ability to connect with the school and understand their child's experience and contribute to that experience? So those are all different looks that this data can provide. Again, this being the first year that we'll have all 3 sets of it together, I think it's really up to how individual schools and we as a management team and schools and their staffs look and reflect and set some goals around it before I can really say what the impact is. I know it's provided valuable data for people to really sort of scratch below the surface and say, well, my students seem to be learning the material well, but how comfortable do they feel in my classroom? Am I reaching every student the way I'd like them to?
It sounds like it actually might help, the data might help with retention of staff.
I think that is one view that absolutely this can help us. I think it can help us dig below the surface when we look at all of the demands that we put on educators at every level of the district, not just in the classroom, but all the way up through. This data, I think, can help us look at where are our priority efforts and where are the priority supports that we need to put in place, not just for our students, but for our educators, so that that's going to enhance the experience for all stakeholders, families as well as students. Sure.
Ms. Hutchinson?
Just want to say, I just did my survey. They just came out, so the information from the family perspective. But reading the questions, I think it will give us a great perspective, even at the board level, of how we are communicating with parents and what parents want to see, which is a voice that hasn't really been heard a lot in the last 50 years. It's gotten better, but, you know, we've got a lot of old school parents out there that, oh, they're just going to do what they do. So I think this will help improve our communication with parents, because it will take into account with what they're seeing, what they're feeling.
Anything further? Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson and Ms. Roy. Thank you. And we'll move forward with the system administration required training review. It's just a line item.
So maybe I could try to address this as well as the next couple of items. Sean is presently looking at our needed PD, and what my suggestion would be to the board is that he make a presentation to this board in May that would include our PD plan for the whole year, so you'd kind of get a good sense of what that is. If I could just go on and get a couple more items here, there may be questions on any of them. District bus driver, it'd be great to have a district bus driver, but I think we would feel, let's use that money for a van first, because we've got more than enough drivers that can drive a regular van. Christie's already talked about the Martell office improvement, which we will eliminate. In terms of the Geiger signage, we're still working on what the flow of traffic would be if we can get the city to give us access from Central Ave. And whatever comes out of that, I think that we can accommodate it. We just got to figure out what we need first, though. So that gets us down a little ways. If there are any questions, any of that.
All right, any discussion from those line items that Mr. Webster just went through? The bus route would be effective. I think Louis was talking that, I don't know if that was the exact number, but the 2,250 was more for signage and paint on the, like, lines to paint on the route.
Right, but we aren't sure if we're going to talk about that Central Ave being one way or both ways, and so it's things like that we really need to better understand, I think, before we invest in any permanent signage.
Very good. Going to class size review across all elementary schools. Who's presenting this? Or is it?
So we made a brief reference last time in tab C. The fold-out schedule there has the class sizes. This board a couple years ago did adopt a class size policy. By law, pre-K 16 is the maximum. 20 is the general maximum kindergarten without, otherwise a mitigation plan would be required. And I think we've done a good job in that. This budget does include a few new classroom positions as well as additional positions at the high school. Our biggest challenge at the elementary level, I think, is in some of the upper grades. You can see some of the numbers, particularly at Geiger. Geiger has been one of our most popular schools, and we've really restricted students from out of district being able to go there. but I know that we mentioned that our need to look at that school and maybe consider with an engineering study what is or is not possible. The overcrowding that did exist at Martell is down to the 5th and 6th grade, which will be taken care of in the new school. So there are pockets for sure, and we try to accommodate them with ed techs. The 18-19 numbers are, Sue put these together and she didn't have all the information, but I believe we're looking at more grades, like there are 3 4th grades and 3 5th grades, right, Amanda, for Farwell next year, which would keep those numbers down.
Any discussion from the board on that? Mr. Jensen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I speak for everyone when I say it would be nice to see some of these numbers go down a bit. I understand we're limited, of course, with funding and space. But yeah, feel rough for those Farwell teachers, especially 4th, 5th, and 6th grade next year. But yeah, I mean, we're at where we're at. I just wanted to voice the frustration and at least vocalize that we are giving a lot of attention to that. I know in facilities committee we're also looking at, you know, enrollment projections, things like that.
Any further discussion? I just wanted to roll back just a little bit because it came to me. In regards to Geiger and traffic flow, I don't think the concern is so much the bus traffic flow, although we had to discuss that. It's more or less that parents and people picking up and dropping off, there's really not very good signage or markers on the road, and I've seen there's 3 of us on this board that go there, and there are people going the wrong direction, just not parking in the wrong places, you know, dropping off their kids whenever it's more dangerous. And if we had just a little bit of paint and maybe a couple of signs that aren't buried by the snow in the winter, then that might just help improve safety. That's all it was. And I don't know if that number reflects that, but maybe it needs a little further investigating. Yep.
So I'll just say a few words here, and then Christy can answer specific questions about the program. This number does not include any transportation. And transportation is one of our biggest expenses as soon as we start talking about moving students from point A to point B. It typically doubles the cost of an after-school program, for example. Longley is our most needy school. You know, whatever measure you want to use, socioeconomic, test scores, and we just think this is a real beneficial program that's benefiting our most needy. Not that it wouldn't be great for other schools as well.
So first of all, the amount listed here is not correct. It's 25,000. It's not 50. Or unless something has changed that I'm not aware of. The Longley contract.
This
Okay.
number reflects Longley as well as special ed. It's what we're currently paying.
Okay. Okay.
I may just interrupt. So you would have some students outside of Longley that are using those tutoring services. Yeah. Okay. So that may have been misunderstood. Okay. So that is a district-wide program. It's only the 25,000 that is Longley. Okay.
Yes, and it is one of our interventions that we use. We target anywhere from depending. So this started 4 years ago when I came to Longley. Jana Mates and I worked with Julia Sleeper to really develop an intervention that we didn't have to pay Lewiston staff for it, and it also beefed up our community partnership goals. And so I talked at my budget meeting the importance of not just having other community members who know kids that can support us and our kids at school, but this is really one of our interventions we use to target kids through the RTI process as a last, if I can be frank, a last ditch effort before we go to referral for some of our kids that need that. Kids who might otherwise end up in alternative ed when they end up at Lewiston Middle School, or that might end up down here at the Dingley School, or might end up in special ed or in another special purpose program. Targets really some of their leadership skills and focusing that in a positive direction to be leaders for their peers and their community, along with work which trickles down to academic achievement, keeping them engaged in school in creative ways. Currently, right now, we have a group of 6th grade girls that work with Tree Megan. I don't know if any of you know Megan, but she's amazing. She comes over every afternoon and works with a group of 6th grade girls who really need her support on everything from being successful in school to setting them up for success next year in 7th grade at the middle school, to focusing on homework, academics, everything that goes along with what a 6th grade girl might need. And then we also have another Tree employee who comes over every morning from 8 to 11, and he connects with students who've been through the disciplinary process previously, like the day before. We give him a list of names and he connects with them. He also has regular students he sees every morning as a mentor type, checking in. But again, he works in collaboration with teachers. He supports in classrooms. It's really, again, what the kids need, what the individual students need based on ODRs, office discipline referrals, or information from our social emotional screener that we do, our teachers do on all of our students.
A couple of questions for my clarification. So the Longley amount, not the special education amount, is $25,000?
Yes.
And is that currently in the budget, or is it something that we would have to add in?
It has been in the budget for 4 years. This is the 4th year.
Okay. So it's not included in this budget, though? It is. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm the one that requested this to be added, and I see this as a prime opportunity to get some help into Martell, since we don't have an RTI staff. And I'm wondering if we couldn't get Tree Street to walk a little further and go up to Martell and do the same program up there with those kids. And then we have all kids going into Connor School having had the same services and the same opportunities. So that's why I asked that it be added.
I wanted to clarify, but it's been clarified, but this money is already in the budget. So we're not asking for that in addition to. And Pam, is it true that Tree Street will service special ed students as well as? Yeah, okay.
Any other further discussion? All right, seeing none, Mr. Webster will go through the last few items here.
Yeah, so the 191,000 is the reduction in subsidy by not participating in Regional Service Center. And I'll come back to that in a second. The 60,000 was just arrived. I was hoping to get something from the city 2 or 3 weeks ago on what are services that they feel they provide to the school and the school could legitimately pay for. Bobby and I need to sit down and roll up our sleeves and assess that 60,000. Now it's interesting that, and I don't know which board member brought this up, but the fund balance discussion. Was that you, Mr. Kerr? Yeah. So fund balance is indeed an interesting topic and something that we need to spend some more time on, particularly next year. But one thing that, if we use, let me step back. For the last 8 years, since I've been doing the budgets in Lewiston, we've always taken the surplus, if there was any left over from the year before, to go into the following year's 2 years hence budget. And we've done that consistently every year. And if you look at the schedule, I think in Schedule E, we see fund balance of $202,000. That was the amount certified by the auditors left over from last year. But throughout all this, there has been a fund balance that's been hanging around forever. Maybe not be a lot of money, but there's some fund balance that we've never really analyzed. Now, if we brought that fund balance into this budget, it doesn't impact minimum required local share at all. So it doesn't help us in that regard. It could be a potential source, and I just thought of this as we were talking here, to pay some of that 60,000 that we might feel was legitimate without otherwise impacting our budget. And what is the significance of that? For every 20,000 we pay the city, that's a penny they take off their tax rate. Now, in years and years and years ago, the school department used to just give money to the city. But that's a definite no-no, because money raised for schools is supposed to be spent in schools. But it could also be used to pay a legitimate expense that the city incurred on the school's behalf. So that's something that we definitely can and should look at. And so what my suggestion would be, and I think the chair may want to take a break before we get to this discussion, would be if we could leave here tonight knowing what are some things that this board feel this really needs to be in the budget. Roofs, reusables might be an example that this board collectively feels should be in the budget. And then to charge me to work with principals and directors and to present to you on Monday a balanced budget that includes those things and covers the reduction in subsidy and some of the other things that you may want. To do this will, without a doubt, require a reduction in some positions. I know that written on here is reduce positions by a minimum of 10. I don't know what that would be to have a balanced budget, but it definitely would be some. So that would be my suggestion for your consideration, to identify those things that definitely need to be in this budget and charge me working with principals and directors to come back to you with something that would balance the budget that you could all support on Monday night.
Any discussion from the board?
I would like to know if there's anything in writing that says we're actually going to lose the reduction to this regional service center vote, because I know there was legislation saying there wouldn't be a penalty or that they were going to phase them out, and I think that's still in process.
So you are correct that there's still legislation under consideration that could well change that. If you look at based on what the law is right now, if you were to look in tab B and go to page 5 of the ED 279, and you can see on that page about a little more than halfway down the number 191,576, which is the number on this schedule, and that's the regionalization and efficiency assistance. It's line B8, and districts that did not put in a phase 1 plan last November, that number is 0 on that. So that's the number under present law. That doesn't mean it couldn't change. You're right.
So why are we worried about what might not come in, especially if we have a fund balance at this point in time?
So the 191 reflects current law, and I don't have a crystal ball in terms of what the legislature will approve and also what the governor would support, because I'm not sure there's enough to override the governor's veto. So there's a lot of things up in the air in this legislature, no question about it. But we just did it in conjunction using present law.
And I don't believe we do have a fund balance in this budget, so will lead me into, with your permission, Mr. Chair, move into item 36 on this list. No. So I'd like to talk about item 36.
Okay, that's what you're asking.
Yeah. All right, I wasn't sure. I'll be brief because I realize everybody's getting tired, but I do think it's important. So I asked that a reduction of 10 more positions in the proposed budget be considered by us. So just over the past 12 months, we, with last year's unbudgeted positions and this year's budgeted positions, we're up to a total of 64 new positions. And Ed Barrett had asked a question of the superintendent during our joint meeting on, is this budget, the budget that we're presenting, is that sustainable? And Mr. Webster suggested that it was. Considering our budget is 85% personnel, I don't know how this budget could be sustainable with any subtle change in state funding or local funding. I'm not sure what the personnel costs increase are every year, but it's got to be, a percentage point that we have to be prepared for. I'm not suggesting that we go below our minimum share, but I am suggesting that we take a portion, or 10 positions worth, and fund our fund balance. First of all, I think that's important. Even possibly consider a contingency fund, but more importantly, I think getting our instructional supplies to 100%, books and periodicals where they should be, prepare for school safety, which I'm just convinced that we're going to have to invest a significant amount of money in that area. And I think it should happen this year in some areas. I think we should identify current programs that have proven to be successful and invest in that area. Having staff that's walking around with 12-year-old laptops that are not meeting needs, I don't believe is acceptable. Providing students technology, and it was brought up tonight, that I assume is what he was talking about, and what the need is in our classrooms for that. It just feels like we have such a long history of not making our foundation or creating a foundation that's solid. So I guess that's the reason why I'm suggesting reducing positions by at least 10. And I'm not going to suggest what position, because I just truly don't think that's our place. I think, the professionals are sitting in this room that can help us do that. But start funding things that will help our foundation be a bit more solid and ensuring that this budget is sustainable if the state changes the rules on us, which they do every single year. So, thank you.
Thank you for that explanation, Mr. Kerr. Any other discussion from the board in regards to that or anything else? All right, and either Mr. Terrio or Shabbat, I noticed the camera isn't switching. I don't know if that's something you're doing tonight or. Oh, okay. User error. All right. I was just curious, Mr. Shabbat, could you turn the lights up to full now? And if you don't mind, could you turn those fans on to circulate some air? It's getting a little warm in here as well. But if the board doesn't mind, we'll take a 5-minute recess. But before we do that, I'll just allow the administration and directors that are here. You're welcome to stay, but if you feel like you want to head out, that's fine. I know it's been a long day for you as well. But we'll come back and discuss anything else from the board in regards to this budget, and hopefully it won't be too long after that. So we'll take a 5-minute recess. We'll return back to session. All right. So at this time, I'll open it up to the board to discuss direction for the superintendent to make any changes to the current budget that we have just currently discussed, or further than that. Would anybody like to start the discussion? Mr. Kerr.
So not starting the discussion, but making a suggestion that we basically go line and do a thumbs up, down. That may make things happen quicker, and we'll identify the ones that we're going to struggle with.
But that's not like a vote.
No, no.
Just a consensus.
Just a sense of the board.
Good suggestion there, Mr. Kerr. Let's start with line item. Do you want to go by line item 18 and down from there? Or do you want to start from the top with the suggestions?
Say line number 4.
All right. All right, we'll start from the very top.
Before we start from the top.
Okay.
What if, so the line, number 36, what if we approve that? Because then that would affect number 4, turn it from 80 to 100.
Because line item number 6, I'm guessing, would save us about, was it $500,000? Is that what is that a number is that?
Well, I'm suggesting, let's just say that the committee did agree that cutting 10 positions so we can fund all the things I listed, or other things the committee feels is important.
All right.
That would put number 4 to 100%, because we budget that at 100%.
So one thing I just wanted to make sure the board was aware of, the majority of our new positions are in special ed. If we cut a special ed position, what will likely happen is that student is now going to have to be serviced out of district at more cost, which means that cutbacks are going to impact general ed, because special ed we're going to pay for one way or the other. So I think I'm referring back to the slide that was in the budget presentation with the workshop. So 11 of the positions, generally speaking, had something to do with class size reduction. It might have been adding that second library in, like at Geiger now has 2 librarians, for example. It was including, the new 2nd grade teacher at Geiger, a new 4th grade teacher at Farwell, those types of positions. 3 of the new positions were STEM positions. There was 1 net new ELL position, And there were 9 positions in alternative ed and student support. So this includes social workers, for example. And there were 5 in technology and facilities. And I realize, we've got tough decisions to make. I would hope that the board would give the principals and directors the opportunity to make a recommendation, realizing that the budget has to be balanced. And it maybe it will take 10 positions, but I don't know if that would necessarily would.
Mr. Kayer can correct me, but I think what he was mentioning earlier was that the 10 positions would be positions that have been vacant for a while. That was part of it.
If it's budgeted and it's a vacant position, then yes, I would easily go to that. But 10 positions is the number that I came up thinking that's about 400,000, give or take. And Bobby didn't confirm that. That was just a number I kind of put together. So vacant or not, doesn't matter to me. If it's budgeted, then I think it's at least on the table.
Mr. Jensen, then Ms. Kortemash.
This is me just thinking out loud here. What if if we know we have to hire like a certain amount of ed techs, but we know the average rate of actually filling the position, could we budget less than the required amount, therefore reducing the overall cost? And then if we do come to needing the extra ed techs, that we could use emergency funds to add those in?
So unlike this year, where we had those emergency funds, unless we were to draw from former fund balance that we were just chatting about, or we said, which we've never done, we take what we think will be unexpended from this year. We've never done that, because until the auditors, we don't know exactly what it is. But unless we were to do something like that, we have no emergency funds. Doesn't mean the board couldn't do that, but we don't have anything like, well, this year was a special situation.
Similar to what Mr. Jensen just spoke about, if these open ed tech positions that we have that continue to go unfilled, have we looked closely at those unfilled positions, and are there any opportunities to reduce some of those positions if they just remain unfilled? From a budgetary standpoint, are there opportunities there to shift positions and money around?
So I think every regular board meeting, there are a couple other ed techs that we do hire. I mean, we are hiring. I guess I think I'd like to invite Pam Emery to the podium, and maybe she could just talk about the number of open positions in special ed and what that means. And if we haven't been able to fill it, why not cut it from the budget?
Why not? We actually fill it with substitute into those positions. So pretty much every building, those ed techs that are unfilled, we are actually filling those with really qualified individuals who, just for whatever reason, do not want a full-time position. So though it is appearing as if they're vacant and we don't have anyone, we actually have someone filling that position supporting our students. So those students are not being unserviced at this time. And we look at this every week. We're talking about how do we remove it. I know just last week we removed one from McMahon. It was a great success, but we are continuously looking at that to make sure that we're keeping students with more restrictive interventions less and less.
Before I forget, thank you everybody who decided to stay. It shows your commitment. Ms. Parks had something to add.
Is there a way to determine how many positions we have district-wide that have been empty for more than one school year? Is that trackable in some way?
I believe it is, but I would want to do, and Bobby may need to do some research on that.
So I think, well, let me just add that ed techs came up. So this year, last year we had empty vacancies on ed techs too. We did for quite some time. We've increased that number in this cycle, and we finally met what we needed beforehand. So that was good news. So now we've, who knows what next year will bring. Maybe we'll fill all these positions. That we don't know. However, I might consider, let's say, well, now we've had consistency 30. Maybe the board will decide let's just use 15 of those positions to do something else with. Kind of like Mr. Kerr mentioned, maybe those vacant positions that maybe Ms. Avery will discover that's been vacant for 5 years, maybe we can use that for something else. So that might be a
So
suggestion
they're
from.
not filled, they're being filled by subs. So every single position has a person in it, meeting the needs of those students. So cutting 15 is still cutting from 15 students potentially.
Mr. Kerr.
So maybe we're filling with subs, but we're not paying benefits. They're probably a lower pay. So there's definitely some savings there that we could look at that have been consistent for several years.
Which is how my budget has stayed stable.
And since Bill G, is that what you were calling yourself earlier, is here? Is here. One of the things that has come up while I was in negotiations, and I've discussed it with Ms. Roy recently, I don't know if this is something that can come up with adult ed, but I know there's other avenues of doing it, but whether it's with substitutes or ed techs or any even other positions might be something that we can help with training, maybe in an adult education classroom setting where people who have an interest can come to and find out how to be better in that position or a future possibility.
And we certainly have hired a lot of the subs who are coming in who have been there every single day, and then we've then taken them on as full-time employees, which has been wonderful.
Yeah. And some of
College
these,
is a piece. They don't have the qualification for that. One of the things that we started to implement this year is allowing them to be Ed Tech 2s upon hire, with the understanding then they would be getting the training to reach up to being a BHP or having at least 90 credits to support some of those specialized programs. So trying to start at the very beginning, coming in as subs, okay, let's work with you to figure out how we can get there. So I think that has been a great avenue for us to get some of our filled positions. So we started much higher. So this is actually very low of where we've been for the last 2 years.
yeah, and that example of a BHP level is a good example of it. But if we can even start as a substitute, that substitute might someday want to be an ed tech and possibly a teacher, or to be that bus driver that wants to get his CDL license or whatever.
And I think that is
somewhere
a
to inspire them.
piece to look at. A lot of our ed techs, we're losing the people in our ed tech positions because they're becoming teachers, which is something that we really want them to be able to do and get to that point. And so we are doing their specialized training, and then they're funneling into teaching positions. So yes, I know the numbers don't look fantastic, but it is for good reasons. So they're moving up in our district.
Don't mean to get too far off topic, but just want to inspire Bill G. Okay, Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's see, regarding the use of subs to fill the empty ed tech positions, does the money allocated in the budget for the ed tech positions, does that money that's allocated go to the subs, or the subs paid by like a sub balance, and therefore do we have the sub balance in the budget as well as the ed tech unpaid portion and benefits? To me, it just seems like having both in the budget is extremely wasteful, making the budget higher than it has to be. It's like reserving space we're never going to use. So if we know we're not going to use it, it seems to me to make a lot of sense to at least take a couple positions off to help out. That'd be my input there.
So I think it's a good point that we should look at more closely to make sure that we're not double counting, if you will, budgeting in ed tech and also budgeting high substitute costs because we know we can't fill the ed tech. If we're budgeting correctly at the end of the year, we'll be over budget on the substitute line and under budget on the ed tech line. But let's put that in, and who knows, maybe that will help us balance the budget. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Hutchinson.
So I'm going to be the unpopular one here.
I'm going to sit back.
Why can't we take 4 coaches and fill 4 teacher spots and put them back in classrooms? We've not heard one thing on coaches this budget season. We have 16 of them. And I know it's not a popular thing. It's not popular, but we're on tight budget times. The city council is insisting we cut this budget. And we can't cut it below required minimum share. So let's take the resources we have and put them where they can be used, in the classroom. Sorry, guys. That's just how it is this year.
So other than at the high school, the coaches are in the Title I budget, which by law is something that principals get to decide how they're going to use their Title I funds. So that can be a topic another day, but Title I funds are not at the high school. Those 2 coaches are indeed in the city budget.
Mr. Jensen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would echo Ms. Hutchinson's thoughts regarding the use of coaches. I know I brought it up last budget year, mostly to deaf ears on the committee. We just weren't ready to discuss it at that point. I think we're ready this year. I think if we have to look for positions to cut, if we absolutely have to, we should consider coaching positions. I would like to see them kind of shifted around. If we do have teacher positions that need to be filled, it makes sense to put them back in the teaching role. I do see benefit of coaching. It's just, are they a priority for at least from my standpoint right now, and not compared to what we could do. So, I mean, I'd even be in favor of moving a coach position to add that STEM teacher for Geiger. So I just feel like that's something we should look into, and I would encourage the superintendent to consider coaches as possible positions to change around or eliminate.
First, a novice question. Are all ed techs special ed techs? Okay, so can we talk about that differently? Yes, so I would like to ask how many general ed tech positions have been unfilled, and what would be the consequence of considering those as positions to eliminate? Go. Someone tell me an answer. I don't.
So that'd be a good question for Bobby to put on her research list, because we don't have the information here, but we can definitely get it. I think that those general ed tech positions, though, we would still be trying to use subs if they're available to fill those as well. But Bobby, can you put that on your list? Good. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, my second question was a clarification of board members Hutchinson and Jensen. Are we talking about athletic coaches or like literary and math coaches? Because both the languages have been used, I think.
It's literacy coaches and math coaches that are in the school that work with teachers. And although there is value to them, they're staff members that work with the teachers, and we have to worry about direct working with the students. And if we need to cut positions, let's put them back in the classrooms first.
Thank you for the clarification. I would have to think about that, and was also very confused why coaches would be teaching.
Any further discussion before I move forward? I do want to, we're getting to that point where we're getting to the fine details. And in the past several years, the board, we've always done the minimum share. But one thing that should be conveyed, and this is where we're getting at, is that we should also convey, this is the minimum share, this is what we actually need, or this is what, the community or the district needs. So sometimes we always talk about that minimum, but I think what we need to share to council, city council, and to the community, that this is where we're at. We're a growing community. We've always done consistently the minimum local share. but this is what we really truly need, and that's where we're kind of nitpicking and determining here. So I don't want to forget that we should continue that. This is a different process this year because of how the funding formula is working, but I don't think we should eliminate that model because I think we often forget about that. But all right, so if you don't mind, we'll go through this. We'll get back on tracks, and we could talk about all these various things tonight. But let's give Superintendent Bill Webster some idea of what direction he should go with. Are there any further discussions on line item number 3? Transportation, well, that's a correction, so, but that was for extracurricular. Any discussion on that? Line 3 up here. Number 4. Oh, 4? Okay, sorry. Oh, I'm seeing, sorry, Mike. I'm looking at Article 4, thinking line item number 3. So, sorry about that. We'll go back to line item number 4, Article 1. These are for the instructional supplies. I guess 4, 5, and 6 go together. There's been discussion about funding it 80% or 100%. And there was also discussion in regards to in association with Ruth's reusable resources and how those two kind of complement each other. Anybody would like to start that conversation? Ms. Hutchinson.
So in a way to get Ruth's reusable resources, where it's only 9,000 plus change, we could take a couple of thousand off each of the instructional supplies, the books and periodicals, and the instructional equipment, and get that. And it would still give us more than what we have currently in our budget for instructional supplies, and get them a bigger bang for our buck.
Any further discussion? Ms. Ray, you're giving us 2 thumbs up? Okay. Okay, agreeing. Mr. Kerr, you look like you have a question.
Yeah, I'm just, we only have some schools using it. I mean, are we going to be assured that all schools will use it?
If we do the $9,423, it'll be available to all schools.
All right, so I agree with that company. What is it again?
Ruth's
Yeah,
Reusables.
Ruth's. But I disagree with taking it from instructional supplies. Our teachers for far too long have been putting money out of their pocket. So again, let's get that to 100% by reducing 10 positions.
I think the 80%, as I believe Mr. Shabbat was commenting on it, is up to what we were at, a year ago or 2 ago? At that level, from his estimates that he came up, if we do Ruth's reusable resources, that might bring us up above that, above the 80%. I'm not going to say 100, but if people put it to good use, we might be pretty much better. But that's my opinion. Looks like Mr. Shabbat might want to say something. No, I just wanted to comment. Can you hit the button so people can hear? It's important for the button because it's the video stream.
David's doing a good job with that. As we're getting down into the detail that, Mr. Carey, you said you didn't want to micromanage and let the building principals do that. We talked about, are they going to be able to comment on some of these things that are coming up, or should all the buildings just let them go home? Because there's no sense for them to stay if they're not going to be able to comment on some of these very specific cuts, like coaches or like taking some money out of this line and adding it to that line.
So thank you for bringing that up. Good valid point, because I could see that there was some discussion while that was happening. I think we'll go through this, and if we do have questions, we may bring it up to the directors and principals. But I think we'll go through it first. Once we kind of hash it out and let Mr. Webster, I'll open it up to you guys as well. So.
We've gone through it once, now we're going to go through it a second time, and then we'll go through a third time. So
Well, I think a lot of these questions might be answered by the time we go through this. That's what I'm guessing. Okay, so are we all set on?
Would you mind, Mr. Chair?
Is it on this line item?
Well, I could say it anywhere, I guess, so I'll wait.
If you want to
No,
say it.
I'll say it later.
Okay. Are we all set with the supplies?
I'm still confused. What is it staying at 80?
Well, what we're saying is Mr. Webster will go back and look at the budget and figure, if we want to keep the supplies in there, we're going to keep it in there. He'll formulate with our suggestions what directions, 80 or something else, but he'll certainly formulate the budget on everything else we give him as well as that. I don't think we need to get too specific.
Yeah, so if I may, it'd be much more helpful to know that the board highly values an area rather than it ought to be 44,500. I think if we can give principals and directors a little flexibility, but if we knew that returning instructional supplies to a higher level was a priority with this board or not, that would help frame our conversation and help us roll up our sleeves, I think, a little more productively. So it could just be, if I may, that's an important thing for me. I value that. This, I don't care that much about that, or this I'd just soon cut. That would be very helpful feedback.
How about periodicals and everything, okay, folks? Indecisive is this way, not so much this way. Okay, who's not so good on this? Anyone down? Okay, I think the majority. Yep. Thumbs up.
Yeah, this is just a kind of a straw poll type thing. Yep. Okay.
We're gonna do any further discussion from the okay, you got that? Afterwards? We're gonna do that after we go through this whole process, if you don't mind, sorry. So line item number 7, ELL contracted services. Mm-hmm.
I'm confused because I thought this was something that we were legally obligated to do, yet it's here as a, maybe we can, maybe we can't. So why is it even here if we are legally obligated to do it?
So just as we're legally obligated to do special ed, whether we budgeted it or not, it's on this list because it wasn't in the budget here, and we've identified that there should be another $2,500 there. So whether it's in the budget or not, we'll spend what we're legally required to do. I don't know if that answers your question.
So that's an admin request?
This is a request that we collectively recommended to the board, yes.
All right, and that's currently in the budget, being added to the budget.
Under these
recommendations. If folks are indecisive, okay. Who's sideways? Okay, we got some 1, 2, 3, 4 ups. Mr. Care sideways. Ms. Hutchinson sideways. How about you?
I'm lost as to what we're voting on at this point.
Translation contracted services, line item number 7.
Something we have to do, right?
Okay. So that was 5 to 4.
503.
Line item number 8, return cuts to Lewiston Middle School extracurricular activities, originally cut from extracurricular, sports, clubs, things like that. This was also Lewiston Middle School, Lewiston High School, co-curricular, and clubs, so that kind of feel like they kind of sort of fit together. Okay, so let's, Lewiston Middle School extracurricular. Any discussion before we go for it? No discussion, we're just, I'm gonna be like here.
Okay, yep.
Next line item number 9, 50% of cuts to Lewiston High School extracurricular. Mr. Care.
Yeah, so my struggle here now is because we're getting into some really high dollar stuff. if we're not taking positions to help cover these costs, I wouldn't be nearly as supportive of a lot of this stuff. So I throw that out. If you start seeing my thumb kind of going in the other direction, that's my struggle. So.
Ms. Quartermash?
And the other question I have is, you know, the line item for the LHS co-curricular is $35,000. You know, a thumbs up or a thumbs down to 35,000, but maybe there's a middle ground there somewhere.
So if I may, we're just taking indication of your pulse on this, and whether this was 9.0 or 09, I think we as a group would analyze it a little further, because you're probably right. There probably is a middle ground.
So you'll keep my consideration as well.
Yes. At the end of the day, we've got to have a balanced budget.
And I think what we were just talking about earlier, I think Miss Avery's going to look at those numbers. So I don't know if we'll have necessarily a solid answer tonight on those positions. My guess, I'm just saying, but at least we can give them direction on figuring that out as well. But I understand, because I'm in the same boat as you, as in some indecisiveness. Which brings me up to the Lewiston Middle School extracurricular again, and the Lewiston High School co-curricular. The reason I'm indecisive on those is because I could take $42,000 and put it towards the arts coordinator position, which I think would be a bigger asset to the entire district, including those two schools, further down the road. But that's my thinking. Did we do the thumbs up or anything on the high school?
Not on the high school.
Not on the high school. So that's where I'm here. So one down and everybody else, oh, one up. Okay. Ms. Hutchinson, I didn't see yours. Okay, she was down. Okay. So that gives you an idea. Line item number 10, McMahon 6th grade Chromebooks for $31,000. Any discussion? No. Yep, feel free to.
Is in Dave's budget to do next year as a priority with that cycle? Right, in that. You had to cut, right. I know. Okay.
Okay, are we moving on? You can stay as indecisive. Okay. Line item number 11, well, do we need to talk about that? Yeah, reallocate the 40,000. Oh yeah, 40,000 for Empower costs to staff development. How's everybody feel on that? Yeah, well, the discussion was it was going to go for training of Power School and further education.
Well, I would say that a thumbs up here would indicate support for the additional professional development. A thumbs down would indicate maybe you favor it as a way just to cut costs. And that would be somewhere in between.
Ms. Hutchinson?
I'm going to have trouble with this one because while I see the importance of professional development around the new module, we don't have a PD plan around it. We're not sure if this is enough. We're not sure if it's too much, and I don't feel we have enough information to say one way or the other. At least I don't.
Mr. Chair, just want to make sure I have this right. So the 40,000 wasn't for professional development for using Empower. It was for the system itself. And so there would have already been funds allocated for professional development for Empower. So this would be in addition to those funds already allocated. So it should just be extra. Okay.
The one comment I would like to input is in the statement from March 19th of this year from our superintendent. Number 3 is money spent in the Empower software will be reallocated to additional teacher professional development to foster as smooth a transition as possible. And I think although that does have budget implications and we were not necessarily involved in that exact decision, I think it could be seen as a promise made to the teaching staff, and I feel like we might need to honor that personally.
We often see, and have, whether it was in this room or in negotiations, always especially in all the contracts we hear, we need more professional development, but especially from the teacher contract. That's where I remember hearing it in ed techs. It's very, in my book, that's why I'm voting in favor of it, because it's always very crucial for that professional development. We've seen things not succeed in our district because of the lack of professional development. That's why I'll vote in favor of that. Mr. Jensen?
Yes, just something I thought further. If we are going to use it for professional development, I mean, also thinking a lot. I'd almost prefer to use that PD in a different way, other than just dedicated for the software itself. That's what I'm thinking right now. So I could see what administrators would want to approach that.
I respect that. However, personally, I don't feel like Empower was a nightmare for a lot of our staff. I don't want Power, and they currently are familiar with Power School, I get that, but I would certainly want them to be on the same page, just my gut instinct, on the same page and understanding that new module, and to be on a smooth plane communicating amongst parents, teachers, and students. That's the key. If we don't do that successfully, we'll be in trouble next year this time. But that's my personal perspective. I understand yours as well.
Mr. Chair, if
Yes.
I may. Is it our job to tell the admin and teachers how to use their professional development time?
Well, the board has a responsibility to set the budget, and I think the board certainly can ask questions and inquire appropriately. It would certainly not be the norm for the board to dictate the training ought to be X, Y, Z.
Ms. Parks?
Just a clarifying question. It was said earlier that there's $294,000 currently assigned for professional development. And of that 294, there was already some percentage of that was going to be used for Empower professional development. Can't that money be rolled over to the Power School professional development, and the $40,000 from the Empower software could be reallocated somewhere else? They're not losing professional development. It's just trading it from one software to the other.
Well, except when originally we had budgeted system-wide to have a full workshop day in August. And I think I'm correct, it's around $200,000 to do that for all 500 plus teachers. We cut that in the budget that you first got, and that 40,000 would essentially return it to what would have allowed that full workshop day. So I think, whatever the number ends up being, we're going to have to relook at our professional development. And as Sean said, we're still, just because we're changing gears here, we don't have that plan yet. But we'll have it certainly by May. But that won't help us with this budget discussion tonight.
Any other further discussion? All right. Can we do a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or sideways? We good? Lost my place here.
Transportation is next.
Oh, thank you. Lewiston High School replacement vans. They were requesting 2 additional vans at a cost of approximately $20,000 each for a total of $40,000. Discussion.
Yes, I think that we obviously need some vans, right? But my suggestion is whatever vehicles that we've purchased in the past that are sitting there not being used need to be sold so we can get funds for somewhere else. I think I'm very adamant that we do that.
Any further discussion? My thoughts on this possibly is reduce it by 20,000 to make it 20, so they still a van in there, and allocate some of that, the other 20,000 to the arts coordinator to make it a full 60,000. It's just a suggestion, but that's a thought. Yeah, go ahead.
So do we have a number of vehicles that we have sitting there and estimated blue value book? What is that called? What we could possibly get in return for that?
So I'll let Rob Callahan correct me, but I believe we purchased 5 buses for 25,000. 22,000. So that gives you an idea that, and we're using one. So we're using one for the special ed. Oh, so we're okay. So you're trying to get a staff member to have that commercial license certification so they can use the vans. But I think it's fair to say we're probably talking about a per unit value in that $4,000 to $5,000 range. Is that a fair statement? Less. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So, Mr. Callahan, just so folks watching this, you're saying current estimated resale value of these would be about 2,000 total, right? For how many? For the 2 or 3 that we currently have. Okay, just wanted to make sure you got through here. Did you want to continue?
No, that makes more sense, I guess. But I think from that last presentation, we were under the impression that they were like brand new vehicles, and they, that's why we were like, "What the heck is going on here?" Okay, thank you for clarifying.
And there's quite a few miles on these vehicles. They had a life before they got here, and then they've had another life here. So we're talking about at least 250,000 miles, I'm guessing, at least, right? Yeah, so the students in automotive, he says, as a PhD for the amount of time that they've rotated tires, oil changes, and fixed lines. Yeah, gotcha. Good experience. And I think they're tired of working on them. That's how often they probably worked on them. So replacement vans, thumbs up or thumbs down or indecisive? Yep. Number 9, Montello painting and door replacement. Any discussion? Okay. Worth talking that length there, Jim. Good job. Yeah. Number 14, facilities security assessment for the district was originally 120,000, requesting 20,000 for just the high school.
So, I'm going to vote this down. needs to be a district-wide issue. Protecting one school with elementary school 100 feet away just doesn't make sense to me. But I understand others' votes may not be in that line.
I also think that we have not flushed this out enough. Bobby even said she's had 3 weeks. It took 2 weeks just to get something back. We could get a better rate. I think we need to do something. We absolutely do. But I don't know that this $20,000, it doesn't feel like it means anything when we don't really know what we're dealing with. And I agree, picking one school is hard to do.
And this is the first estimate. We haven't even received any other estimates, so I guess I'll be indecisive on this one.
Well, I think security in general needs to be a high priority.
Agreed.
So if I just may, that if we go forward with this, that doesn't mean we're stopping. I think we need to look at other funding sources. I talked briefly about fund balance as a source. It was just more we have no idea what a security assessment is going to look like. It may be a template for every building in a district, or we may feel that, this is more geared to general business rather than educational setting. But it seemed to be a reasonable investment with a reputable company to try it and just see what it looked like, not stopping looking at other options as well.
In line with Superintendent Webster, thinking optimistically, I know the state legislature is considering adding some money to school districts. So if we did receive any of those funding, being a pretty large district in the state, I imagine we would receive quite a bit. We could use those funds for a full assessment. I don't really like the idea of $20,000 per year, and it takes like 6 years to get everything done. So if we could get some kind of money for the state for that, I think that would be great. Optimistic it's going to happen. I'm cautiously optimistic.
All right. Any others? Okay, are we all set? That's not an easy one.
It's not an official vote.
I think you can skip adult ed. We're going to do that.
Thank you. 18 leadership stipends, 17,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
Discussion? Yeah, go ahead.
So these monies put all our schools on a level playing field because we have some schools where leadership teams have been being paid all along. This is an opportunity where teachers become partners with administrators in the vision for a school, and we think it is a really positive aspect for school climate.
All right. Any discussion? Seeing none. 17,000. Do you have thoughts, discussions? See the wheels turning. All right, ready? All right, those, I'll just make your vote. What's that? All right, everybody knows my position on this next one, the arts coordinator position. Any discussion? No? Okay.
Oh, that was quick.
Okay, yeah. All right, next line item, walking school bus.
Oh, this one's not for.
This would be for Farwell. Line 21, ed techs for duty aids. 30,000. Okay. Yep.
My understanding that this wasn't something that you guys really needed.
So these are not for Thank you.
Well, don't get mad.
Okay. Go ahead.
Are these positions that get filled by subs, or are these positions that are just not filled at all? Non-existent positions. Okay, all right.
All right, number 22, Martell, elimination of RTI teacher. This is voting on the elimination of that. Yes. Sums up, it supports the elimination of it. Any? Right. Okay, so you're voting for if you want the teacher? Okay.
And I'm okay with that. That's a good presentation from staff.
Do we need to do the STEM teachers and budget for all elementaries? Do you want to?
I think Geiger just does get one.
Yeah. It would be in guard to guide. So
For the record, I would think that if we're going to have equity among all our students, that Geiger should have a position also.
Okay, so we're voting in favor of. Oh,
I would agree with Ms. Cordamonte's sentiments, and if possible, ask the superintendent, and if possible, to find a way to make that a full position, so Geiger can have a full-time STEM teacher. I know it'd be tough, but I don't know if that's a priority of the board, if they agree as well.
Or do some solution right now, like an ed tech, till we can move up to a teacher, at least something STEM in Geiger, so it didn't cost as much the first year, or something for STEM for Geiger.
so we're voting for some favor of adding some STEM, something STEM at Geiger.
We're voting for equity.
Ed Tech 3, oh, that was just a discussion, informational. Ruth reusables, did we finish that? Okay, yes, that's in favor. Yep. Climate survey, 17,200. Any discussion? Seeing none? Get all that? Okay, we don't need to go through the required training review, right? District school bus driver. Elimination of Martell office improvements.
We're going to take it out.
Okay, we're taking it out.
Yeah.
Signage or some type of arrows, paint on for traffic flow at Geiger. $2,250 or something else. We weren't clear on exactly what it is, but it would be that or less, I would assume, because facilities director, Louis, thank you, mentioned a different number, but I remember he wasn't clear on it at the time. So you would be in favor of signage and paint at Geiger. Any discussion? Seeing none?
Well, I do have.
Oh, there
Yeah,
is one.
just a quick question. What's the time frame of looking into restructuring the Geiger flow of traffic, buses and all that?
So I know we're working on an application. It has to go to the planning board. Our hope is to have action this summer so that we can take advantage of that back entrance. But I don't know if Bobby has any more information at this point.
If if you don't mind, I'm curious what Mrs. Gish has to say about it, because it's her school, and I know that she sees a lot, hears a lot. Would it be okay if she spoke for a minute? Would you mind? Okay.
Please come to the podium, yes.
Go. So we're currently working with Louis, and I just wrote a memo to him and directed at the planning board to see if if it's a possibility to open up that access road. And we're also working on how we can kind of shift our visitor parking. So currently our visitor parking is the first row that's closest to the entrance of the school, and we're maybe thinking about moving that to the last row that's closest to the playground, which would open up that last row for parking for dismissal for parents, because it's closer to that gym door and that's where they're picking up their kids. The problem with the buses and the cars coming in and out of that same road is that in the wintertime, when that road is even more narrow, we have cars that are parking along that road, the exit and entrance to the school, because there's nowhere else to park, and it's making it even more narrow. And then we have cars that are trying to leave, buses that are trying to come in, and it just creates a really not safe traffic flow. And it's really the end of the day. So the morning, because kids are coming in anytime between 8:15 and kind of 8:40, it flows a little bit better in the morning. But in the afternoon, all of our riders are being picked up at 3:05, and on any given day, we have up to 100 students that are being picked up by parents and are not taking the bus. And that's for various reasons. Some are out-of-district parents, so some out-of-district students, so they don't have busing options. And then others, it's just by choice that they don't want their kids to ride the bus, or it's easier, more convenient when they're coming home from work.
Cindy, I obviously know all about the problem with the parking. When it's hard to explain unless I'm going to be doing this a lot in explanations. Do you think signage would help in a sense where that curve by the exit where when the snow melts, parents park and they park on the tar, that's really what causes the problem. Do you think if you had signs there that said, don't park on the tar, park on the grass?
Right.
They do?
No, right.
Well, you can still park there.
So it might help.
Just not on the tar, guys.
So they
Really,
park
take a
everywhere.
look
I mean,
at
they're parking on the hill. They're parking in between the rows of cars. They're parking in the handicap spots, and literally parents are getting there. Dismissals at 3:05, and parents are getting there. No joke, at like 2:00. And like literally taking a nap in their car, reading. They should just come in and volunteer. But yeah, so it's an issue, and I think it's because we have such a large number of students being picked up.
So you don't think that any extra signage
I think signage could help, and I
Okay,
think
you do.
extra parking would really help. And we've even talked about like in that middle loop, there's a green area that maybe putting some spots going diagonal in there for staff. Staff that we know aren't leaving at 3:15 when buses are coming. So
Okay.
we've brainstormed all kinds of
Okay.
different things.
Ms. Parks?
Without taking up too much time and being really elaborate, what was the purpose of the back access road if it's never been used anyways? And when it was put in, when the school was built, wasn't there any kind of surveying the area for traffic flow and that kind of stuff that would need to be done now?
One of the big differences is that we're utilizing the school so much differently than the way it was designed. So the RISE program, for example, which has perhaps 7 or 8, 9 staff per room, each one of them has an individual car. So we greatly underestimated the staff, or the state did, and the parking lot was very undersized. The roads to and from were undersized. The initial permit restricted that Central Avenue exit to fire trucks only. So we've got to get that permit changed in order to be able to use it.
I'll add that Geiger does not have a sidewalk, so maybe that could be changed through the city someday, because I think that would add more walkers. I know there's a distance ratio thing there, but I know Geiger also does a bike to school day. I think I should have a few times, which is exciting to a lot of students and parents. And so those are things that can eliminate some of these traffic concerns. But and I know there's been discussion on adding parking in the back and all this rerouting, but and for me, it's most of the time it's in the morning, and I have concerns about that. But in the worst time of the day, it's the evening. So, but to me, the simple paint lines on the ground for direction to a couple of signs. I know you'd have some "Don't park here" signs and so forth, but there are definitely some voids in certain areas that I think could help the safety aspect. And I don't think that this price tag is correct, but I could be wrong. And so that's why I'm going to be voting in favor, is just to add that simplicity, not the whole big picture here. That's what I'm looking, and that's why I'm telling you. So if we could just vote on that for now, is that everybody? Okay, nodding heads. So I'm going to say this. Thank you. And I lost my place. Hang on a second. There we go. Great. Climate survey. Signage. There we go. Thank you. Class size. No. Okay. Tree Street.
More a question than the budget number.
Number 32. Tree Street. Was that a question? I think we answered that question, right? Yeah.
It still suggests that they go into Martell.
Yes. Yes. So I would suggest hearing from the board on line 35. I'd like to know the board's support for picking up some additional city expenses that are being incurred on the school's behalf. Just conceptually.
Are you saying going to the city to ask?
No, in your packet, we did add that list that Heather Hunter had put together, identifying another 60,000 of expenses that, in her mind, could be charged to the city. Bobby and I, we haven't looked at that, so I don't pass judgment on the 60,000, but it's in the Google Drive. If you look at, let's see if I can get to it. It's called School Apportioned Charges. It's an Excel spreadsheet. And where it says currently billed, we're already paying for those fees. So most of the new stuff is down toward the bottom. We already pay for our share of the Armory. But you can see there are a lot of finance department charges. And we need to assess whether we feel that's legit. But assuming there are some legit expenses in there that we could say justifiably we should pay for, what's the sense of the board on that?
So possible $60,000 from the city that we up to that we could send Mr. Webster or somebody to investigate. And there's a question by Ms. Hutchinson.
So this is money the school system would owe the city, am I right? Then where's the money that the city should owe the school system for using our schools and disrupting our staff and our students for elections? Longley is put aside, their kids are disrupted every time there's an election, and we're going to do...
Montello, too.
So, no, because on the referendums, like the budget referendum, it's only Longley.
Let's not forget.
Revotes, it's only Longley.
The Armory
And,
also has education.
We have gun shows going into the Armory with Star Academy. I mean, if we're going to share the space, then we shouldn't be charged for it.
Yes, Mr. Jensen.
Thank you. I know for the administrative subcommittee, I think at a few future meetings, we do have discussing the use of school buildings for Election Day. So that is something that we have been planning for a little while now. I think we were first discussing that at the beginning of February. So it very much is on the agenda, because I'd very much like for us to look into that. I just remember like subbing over in Auburn last year, and for how much focus they put on locking down the building, safety, security. Then they go, oh, okay, well, we're going to open this door and let like complete strangers come in, and then we're just going to put a divided cafeteria table up to block them, and oh, the break room's on the other side, so teachers have to go through too. To me, it's just crazy. It's crazy. So I'd very much like the district to review that, and we plan on it. So yes.
So the vote will be to get money from the city to use our schools. $500,000. We can leave tonight now. All right, there was a question over here somewhere.
Well, just a statement from a guy who was on the other side for 6 years. The taxpayers paid for the schools, and voting is important, and we should make it as easy and as accessible as possible. And without investing a ton of money for new structures, schools are the best option for the purpose of voting. May not be for safety issues, but anyway, taxpayers own the building.
We should just not have school that day and extend the school year, right? Just being funny. All right, so what are we voting on here? The 60,000. Oh, Mr. Jensen had another.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to also kind of come back to regarding the fund balance. Considering the situation we're in, I would be okay with using 60 grand from it to cover that expense. I have just pretty strong reservations about it, but I think considering the position we're in and the taxpayers are in, I would be supportive.
So will this tie us into this is going to be an annual expense, or is this a one-time thing?
Well, anything is possible, but I would think that if we're going to do it, we should probably view it as an annual expense, whatever we do. So, as the city has struggled to balance its budget, they haven't had the growth that the schools have had, or the additional funding the schools has had. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we've started paying fees. Of course, taking the Armory was clearly a legitimate place where we should pay a fee. But this is, given the present situation where the additional funding that the schools got, this kind of raised the temperature a little bit in looking at this. I don't know, maybe Alicia can update us.
I would love to offer some insight here. So I think the efforts on the side of the finance department are to make sure that we are accounting for everything. So money that services that are used have to be paid for in a normal system. And so I think this is something that is currently optional, but I don't think will be in the future. So if that's helpful for people to think about. The city council gave the finance director permission to defer some payments to fiscal year 20 to lower our portion of raising the local share of taxes, and that I think was in reaction to how large of an increase the school district was asking for and needs to meet the minimum local share. So I think there are some larger conversations about that push and pull, and I'm happy to have those with people, and I think the city is as well. So that's all I have. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it works out that the state does give us that $191,000, would that go directly to the fund balance? I know it's kind of theoretical at this point.
So if the law did change, it would be similar to the situation last year, where we passed a budget not knowing what the final funding would be, and then we ended up getting more. And under the way the article is read now, we would first use money to ensure that taxpayers didn't pay more than the required local share, then the board could use it for emergency purposes, or it would become fund balance for the following year.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, thumbs? In favor of the 60,000.
Or some number thereof.
What about it?
Through the fund balance.
Well, I thought you said it was optional, but it might not be in the future. Isn't that what you're
We
saying?
good?
Whatever that means.
We're good, Megan. All right. Are we going? Okay, we did that. To reduce, to have Mr. I'm just reviewing this. Superintendent Webster and appropriate staff to help him in determining the review of staff positions and possible reducing staff positions by 10. Do we want to review that again?
No, I mean, I don't want to review it again, but it's still on the table. But compromise is my thing. So, I mean, if there's a number here that makes more people comfortable, I just really would like to see funding in the other areas get up to where it should have been a long time ago. And ed techs and all that stuff, whatever it takes. I mean, that's the least painful.
So a review of that is what we're looking for? All right. Did we already guide you on that? Yeah, okay. Any further discussion from this committee?
So what is that? So we're not giving a thumbs up or thumbs down, we're just asking for a review, and we'll talk more about it next meeting?
So we'll come back to you with a detailed sheet with a balanced budget, and some of this will probably have to take out of positions, but we're going to look, as Mr. Jensen has suggested, making sure we're not double budgeting for something we only need to budget once.
Any further discussion? I'm going to open it up to the audience. Anybody from the audience would like to come up to the podium? All right, seeing none. Back to the board.
Is this the time to make a motion to adjourn?
You got it. We have a motion for adjournment by Ms. Ray.
Parks seconded already.
Parks. Those in favor? All thumbs.
Is that Parks, second?
Yeah.